The moment Lena Carter's lips touched Victor DeLuca's mouth in front of 300 wedding guests, she signed a contract written in blood she couldn't see. What started as a desperate attempt to survive a dangerous witness became an obsession that would drag her into the world of organized crime, transform her from invisible artist to protected possession, and force her to choose between the safety of anonymity and a love that could destroy them both. This is the story of a woman who kissed a monster and refused to look away when he showed her his teeth. If you want to see where this forbidden romance takes Lena and Victor, stay until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Castellano estate didn't welcome strangers, and Lena Carter knew she was exactly that. A stranger wearing borrowed silk and carrying a clutch purse that cost less than the champagne flutes circulating through the reception hall. She'd been invited as a +1 to a +1, a friend of her college roommate who happened to be dating a distant cousin of the bride. The invitation chain was so convoluted that Lena suspected nobody actually knew who she was, which suited her perfectly fine. She preferred being invisible. The wedding itself had been excessive in that particularly obscene way that old money families displayed their wealth, white roses flown in from Ecuador, a string quartet that had probably performed at Carnegie Hall, and enough security personnel scattered throughout the grounds to make Lena wonder if she'd accidentally wandered into a political summit rather than a matrimonial celebration. The estate sprawled across what had to be 40 acres of manicured Connecticut countryside, all rolling lawns and carefully pruned hedges that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. The reception was held in a glass conservatory that jutted out from the main house like a crystal growth, all vaulted ceilings and Edison bulbs strung between exposed beams. It was beautiful in that intimidating way that made Lena acutely aware of every thread in her department store dress. She'd spent most of the evening tucked into corners, nursing the same glass of wine and making polite conversation with other peripheral guests who seemed equally uncertain of their place in this gilded ecosystem. Her roommate had disappeared an hour ago with her boyfriend, leaving Lena to fend for herself among strangers who all seemed to know each other, who all seemed to speak in a shorthand of shared history and inside jokes that she couldn't penetrate. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Lena decided she'd fulfilled her social obligation and could reasonably escape. She'd slipped out of the conservatory through a side entrance, hoping to find her way back to the main house and call a car service without having to navigate the maze of farewell conversations and insincere promises to stay in touch. The night air hit her like a cool palm against overheated skin. Late September in Connecticut carried that particular quality of autumn, warm enough during the day but sharp once the sun set, smelling of dying grass and wood smoke from some distant fireplace. Lena breathed it in gratefully, the tension in her shoulders already beginning to unwind as she put distance between herself and the party. The gardens behind the conservatory were less manicured than the front lawns, allowed to sprawl in that deliberately wild way that required just as much maintenance as formal landscaping but was meant to look effortless. Stone pathways wound between overgrown rose bushes and ornamental grasses that rustled in the breeze. Landscape lighting had been installed along the walkways, but the bulbs were spaced far enough apart that shadows pooled thick between them. Lena followed the path that seemed to lead back toward the main house, her heels clicking against the flagstones. She'd made it maybe 50 yards when she heard the voices. Low, male, angry. She stopped walking, instinct prickling at the base of her skull. The voices were coming from somewhere off the main path, deeper in the garden where the decorative lighting didn't reach. Every rational thought told her to keep walking, to mind her own business, to get back to the house, and call her car and forget she'd heard anything. But there was something in the quality of those voices, something sharp and dangerous that made her think of violence barely contained. Lena hesitated at a fork in the path. Left would take her back toward the house. Right would take her toward the voices. She went right. Later, she would try to rationalize that decision, tell herself she'd been worried someone was hurt, that she'd thought she might need to help, that it had been concern rather than curiosity. But the truth was simpler and more damning. Lena Carter had spent her entire life being invisible, being careful, being the person who didn't make waves or attract attention. And for one moment, standing in that garden with wine buzzing pleasantly through her bloodstream and her feet aching in expensive shoes, she'd wanted to know what it felt like to be reckless. The path narrowed as it curved deeper into the garden, rose bushes pressing close on either side. Thorns caught at her dress. Lena could hear the voices more clearly now, 3 distinct speakers, maybe 4. She crept forward slowly, grateful for the shadows, until she could see them. There were 5 men in a small clearing ringed by hedges. 4 of them stood in a loose semicircle around the 5th, who was on his knees in the dirt, with his hands zip-tied behind his back. Even in the dim light, Lena could see the blood on his face, the way he was breathing in short, pained gasps that suggested broken ribs. But it wasn't the kneeling man who made Lena's breath catch in her throat. It was the one standing directly in front of him. Even at a distance, even in shadow, there was something about him that drew the eye and held it. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of build that came from disciplined effort rather than genetic luck. Dark hair swept back from a face that would have been classically handsome, if not for the absolute coldness in his expression. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Lena's monthly rent, immaculate despite the violence clearly unfolding, and he radiated the kind of authority that made grown men instinctively straighten their spines. Lena had never seen him before in her life, but she knew exactly who he was. Victor DeLuca. She'd heard the name whispered at the wedding, always in that particular tone people used when discussing someone dangerous. The groom's family had old money, old connections, old roots in the kind of East Coast establishment that valued discretion above all else. The DeLuca family had new money, new power, and a complete disregard for discretion when it suited their purposes. This wedding was a merger disguised as a romance, and Victor DeLuca was the reason it mattered. "You took something that didn't belong to you," Victor said, and his voice was worse than Lena had imagined, cultured and calm and absolutely devoid of mercy. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think you were clever enough to steal from me and walk away?" The kneeling man tried to speak, but one of the other men kicked him in the ribs before he could get the words out. He folded over with a choked sound, gasping. "I don't want excuses," Victor continued, as if the interruption hadn't happened. "I don't want apologies. I want you to understand the lesson here, that loyalty isn't optional and theft has consequences." He nodded to the man standing closest to him, a broad-shouldered enforcer with hands like sledgehammers. "Break his fingers, all of them. Then make sure he understands that if he ever comes near my business again, we'll move past lessons and into examples." Lena's hand flew to her mouth, muffling the gasp that tried to escape. She took an involuntary step backward, and her heel caught on an uneven flagstone. She stumbled, catching herself on the rosebush beside the path. Thorns bit into her palm. The clutch purse she'd been carrying dropped from her other hand, hitting the ground with a sound that might as well have been a gunshot in the sudden silence. Every man in the clearing turned toward the sound, toward her. For one crystalline moment, Lena stood frozen in the pathetic light, her hand bleeding from rose thorns and her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She could see Victor DeLuca's face clearly now, sharp cheekbones, a mouth made for cruelty, and eyes so dark they looked black in the shadows. Those eyes locked on hers, and Lena felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "Run!" something screamed in the back of her mind. "Run, right now!" She ran. Lena spun on her heel and bolted back down the path, her heels catching on flagstones and her dress tangling around her legs. She could hear shouts behind her, the sound of footsteps pounding after her, but she didn't look back. She just ran, branches whipping at her face and her lungs burning as she gasped for air. The path forked and she went left, then right at the next intersection, having absolutely no idea where she was going except away. The garden had become a maze, every turn looking identical to the last, and panic was starting to claw its way up her throat when she burst out of the hedges and nearly collided with a couple strolling arm in arm along the lawn. They startled at her sudden appearance, taking in her disheveled state with matching expressions of concern and judgment. Lena mumbled an apology and kept moving, forcing herself to walk now despite every instinct screaming at her to keep running. She could see the conservatory ahead, light and music spilling out across the grounds, and she aimed for it like a drowning woman swimming for shore. She'd almost reached the entrance when a hand closed around her elbow. Lena spun, a scream building in her throat, and found herself face to face with Victor DeLuca. Up close, he was devastating. Not handsome in any soft or approachable way, but striking in the manner of sharp edges and hard lines, a face built for severity and command. His dark eyes swept over her in a single assessing glance that managed to be both invasive and entirely impersonal, cataloging details and dismissing them just as quickly. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he said quietly. His hand on her elbow wasn't tight enough to hurt, but the controlled strength in it was unmistakable. "That creates a problem for both of us." Lena tried to jerk her arm free. He didn't let go. "I didn't see anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Let me go." "You're a terrible liar." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, there and gone in an instant. "Which makes this conversation very short. You have two options. You can come with me quietly so we can discuss what happens next, or I can have my men escort you somewhere private. Either way, we're having this conversation. The only question is whether you make a scene that draws attention neither of us wants." The music from the conservatory swelled behind them, some slow song that had couples drifting onto the dance floor. Through the glass walls, Lena could see women in evening gowns swaying in the arms of men in expensive suits, all of them blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. She could scream, should scream. But Victor DeLuca was already turning toward the conservatory, his hand still locked around her elbow, and Lena found herself being guided forward before her brain could catch up to what was happening. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Solving both our problems." He led her straight through the entrance and onto the dance floor, positioning her in the middle of the crowd. His hand slid from her elbow to her waist, pulling her close enough that she could feel the heat of him through the layers of fabric between them. "Dance with me." "What? No, Dance with me," he repeated, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. His other hand captured hers, lifting it to the proper position. "And smile. Everyone's watching." Lena glanced around and realized with a jolt of horror that he was right. Every eye in the conservatory seemed to have tracked their entrance, conversations dying mid-sentence as people registered who Victor was dancing with. She could feel the weight of those stares like physical pressure, speculation, and surprise and barely concealed envy all mixed together. "Why are they looking at us?" she managed. "Because I don't dance," Victor said simply. "And I certainly don't dance with women nobody knows. Which means you just became interesting, which means whatever you saw in the garden becomes irrelevant." He moved them into the waltz with the kind of practiced ease that suggested expensive lessons, leading her through the steps with absolute confidence. Lena followed automatically, muscle memory from a high school cotillion her mother had insisted on taking over, even as her mind raced to process what was happening. "I don't understand." "You witnessed something that could be problematic for me," Victor explained, his voice barely above a murmur. Anyone watching would see his lips near her ear and assume intimacy rather than threat. "But if you're someone I'm publicly showing interest in, then you become protected rather than a liability. Nobody touches you without my permission, and nobody questions why you were in the garden because obviously you were meeting me." "That's insane." "That's expedient." His hand tightened fractionally on her waist, a subtle reminder that she was still very much in his control. "Play along for 5 minutes, let yourself be seen, and then you can leave. Go home. Forget this happened. But if you try to run or make a scene, I promise you the alternative will be much less pleasant." Lena's heart was still racing, but not entirely from fear anymore. Being this close to Victor DeLuca was overwhelming in ways she hadn't anticipated. The subtle scent of his cologne, the controlled strength in the way he moved, the absolute certainty in every word he spoke. He was dangerous, she knew that intellectually, but there was something magnetic about that danger that made it hard to look away. "What happened to the man in the garden?" she asked. Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered through his eyes. "That's not your concern. You were going to break his fingers." "I still might. He stole from me. There are consequences for that. That's barbaric. That's business." He turned them smoothly, positioning her so that she was facing the main crowd. "Smile, Lena. You're supposed to look enchanted, not horrified." She jerked her gaze up to his face. "How do you know my name?" "Your driver's license. Your friend dropped your purse in the garden when you ran." He produced her clutch from his jacket pocket with one hand, pressing it back into her palm without missing a step in the dance. "Lena Marie Carter, 28, Brooklyn address. You work at an art gallery in Soho. No criminal record, No outstanding warrants, no obvious connections to anyone who matters. You had someone run a background check on me in the last 10 minutes? I had someone run a background check on you in the last 5 minutes, Victor corrected. And the conclusion is that you're exactly what you appear to be. Nobody important who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The words stung more than they should have, probably because they were accurate. Lena Carter was nobody important. She'd spent her entire adult life being exactly that, the friend who blended into the background, the employee who did good work without seeking credit, the woman men looked past rather than at. But something about hearing it stated so flatly, so dismissively, from this man who radiated power and control, made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Well then," she said, lifting her chin, "I guess you have nothing to worry about. Nobody's going to listen to a nobody." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real reaction she'd gotten from him beyond cold calculation. "You're angry." "I'm terrified," Lena corrected. "But yes, I'm also angry. You're blackmailing me into dancing with you to cover up an assault, and you're acting like I should be grateful for the privilege. You should be grateful I'm giving you the option to walk away. The option to walk away isn't freedom when the alternative is violence." For a moment, Victor said nothing. He just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes, still moving them through the waltz with mechanical precision. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile if there had been any warmth behind it. "You're braver than you look," he observed. "Or stupider. I haven't decided which." Can it be both? That actually earned her what looked like genuine amusement, brief as lightning. Probably. The song was winding down, the final notes hanging in the air. Victor slowed their movement, bringing them to a stop at the edge of the dance floor. He released her waist but kept hold of her hand for one moment longer, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that could have been either threat or caress. "Thank you for the dance, Lena Carter," he said, pitching his voice to carry to the nearest observers. Then, lower, for her ears only, "Go home. Don't talk about what you saw. Don't come back here. And understand that this protection I've just offered you is contingent on you being smart enough to accept it." He released her hand and stepped back, already turning away to greet someone calling his name from across the room. Lena stood frozen for a heartbeat, her hand still tingling where he'd touched her, her mind reeling from the whiplash of the last 15 minutes. She should leave. Right now. She should walk out of this conservatory and this estate and never look back. But as Victor moved through the crowd, people parting automatically to let him pass, Lena found herself watching him go with something complicated twisting in her chest. Fear, yes. Anger, absolutely. But underneath that, quieter and more dangerous, was curiosity. Victor DeLuca was a monster. She'd seen the evidence of that in the garden, heard it in the cold certainty of his voice when he'd ordered violence like other men ordered coffee. But he'd also protected her when it would have been easier to simply make her disappear. Had given her the option to walk away when he could have made certain she never had the chance to talk. That didn't make him good, but it made him something more complicated than pure evil. And God help her, Lena wanted to understand why. She was still standing there, clutching her purse and trying to make sense of her own thoughts, when a hand touched her shoulder. Lena jumped, spinning around to find her roommate Sarah grinning at her with wine-flushed cheeks and speculation dancing in her eyes. "So," Sarah said, drawing the word out, "you and Victor DeLuca, when were you planning to mention that?" "There's nothing to mention," Lena said quickly. "It was just a dance." "Honey, Victor DeLuca doesn't just dance with anyone. Half the women at this wedding have been trying to get his attention all night, and he's ignored every single one of them. Then he walks in with you, and—" Sarah made an explosive gesture with her hands. "Instant couple of the year." "What's the story?" Lena scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't sound insane. "We just met. In the garden. It wasn't planned." "Well, whatever it was, you've definitely gotten noticed." Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "Jessica Castellano, the bride? She was asking me about you. Wanted to know who you were and how you knew Victor. I think you might be getting invited to some very exclusive events if you play this right." The thought made Lena's stomach turn. "I don't want to be invited anywhere. I just want to go home." Sarah's expression shifted from excited to concerned. Are you okay? You look really pale. I'm fine. Just tired. I think I'm going to call a car. Already? But the night's just getting started. Lena manufactured a smile that felt like it might crack her face. I have to open the gallery early tomorrow. Rain check? She didn't wait for Sarah's response, just turned and headed for the exit, weaving through clusters of guests who were now looking at her with open curiosity instead of the polite indifference she was used to. The weight of those stares pressed against her shoulders, making her skin crawl. She'd wanted to be invisible, safe, unremarkable. And in the space of one dance, Victor DeLuca had made that impossible. The night air hit her again as she escaped the conservatory, cooler now that it was fully dark. Lena pulled out her phone and opened the car service app with shaking hands, requesting the first available driver. ETA, 12 minutes. She could wait 12 minutes. Lena found a stone bench near the main house, tucked into shadows but still visible enough that she wouldn't look like she was hiding. She sat down carefully, her legs suddenly unsteady, and tried to process everything that had just happened. She'd witnessed an assault, been chased through a garden by men who worked for a crime lord, been forced into a dance that had apparently convinced everyone at the wedding that she was somehow connected to the most dangerous man in the room. It was insane, all of it. And the worst part was the small, shameful corner of her mind that kept replaying the feeling of Victor's hand on her waist, the dark intensity of his gaze, the controlled power in every movement. He was a monster. She needed to remember that. But monsters, apparently, could be devastatingly compelling. Leaving so soon? Lena's head snapped up. Victor DeLuca stood in front of her bench, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd simply materialized out of the darkness. The casual posture should have made him seem less threatening, but somehow it had the opposite effect, like a predator pretending to be domesticated. My car will be here in 10 minutes, Lena said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. I know. I watched you request it. He gestured to the empty space beside her. May I? Do I have a choice? Not really, but he waited for her slight nod before sitting down, maintaining a careful distance between them. I wanted to make sure you understood the situation. I understand that you threatened me into dancing with you to cover up the fact that I saw you ordering someone's fingers broken, Lena said flatly. What else is there to understand? Victor was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on something in the middle distance. The man in the garden stole $50,000 from one of my warehouses. He was trusted with access, with responsibility, and he betrayed that trust. In my world, that kind of betrayal requires a response, not just to punish him, but to make sure everyone else understands the cost of stealing from me. And that justifies torture? It justifies consequences. He turned to look at her directly. You live in a world where if someone wrongs you, you can call the police, file a report, pursue legal channels. I don't have that luxury. The business I run exists outside conventional law, which means I have to create my own system of justice. It's not pretty, and it's not what they teach in civics class, but it's necessary. You're trying to make yourself sound reasonable, Lena said, like you're some kind of reluctant enforcer instead of a man who enjoys having power over others. Victor's jaw tightened. I don't enjoy it, but I don't shy away from it either. This is the world I inherited, the world I was born into, and I learned a long time ago that hesitation gets you killed. So you break people's fingers instead. I make sure they understand the rules and the consequences of breaking them. Yes. Lena shook her head, equal parts horrified and fascinated by his complete lack of pretense. And me? What happens to me if I break your rules? That depends on what rules you break. Victor shifted slightly, angling himself toward her. Tonight, I gave you a very simple instruction. Go home. Don't talk about what you saw. Forget this happened. Can you do that? Do I have a choice? Everyone has choices, Lena, but not all choices come with consequences you can live with. The unspoken threat hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Lena should have been terrified. Should have been planning how to go straight to the police the moment her car arrived, but instead she found herself asking, why did you dance with me? You could have just made me disappear, threatened me somewhere private. Why make a public show of it? Victor considered the question, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Because public association offers you protection that a private threat never could. If something happened to you now, after half the wedding saw us together, questions would be asked. Attention would be drawn. It's messier than making you quietly vanish, but it's also safer for both of us. Safer for you, you mean? Safer for you, he corrected. Because now you're not just a witness I need to silence. You're someone I've publicly shown interest in, which means you're off limits to anyone who might otherwise consider you a loose end worth tying up. The implications of that settled over Lena like ice water. Other people were going to come after me? Possibly. Probably not. You're a civilian with no obvious connections, and going after you would raise more problems than it would solve. But there are men in my organization who believe in eliminating all potential risks, no matter how small. By dancing with you in front of everyone, I made eliminating you a bigger risk than leaving you alive. He'd protected her. The realization was stunning in its simplicity. Victor DeLuca, monster, criminal, man who ordered torture like other people ordered dinner, had protected her by making her visible instead of making her disappear. I don't know whether to thank you or hate you, Lena admitted quietly. Both is probably accurate. Victor stood, brushing invisible lint from his immaculate suit. Your car is here. Lena looked up and saw headlights pulling into the circular drive in front of the main house. She stood as well, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. This is goodbye, she said. It should have been a statement, but it came out like a question. Victor looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his dark eyes. Probably, he agreed. He didn't sound convinced. Lena didn't feel convinced either, but she nodded anyway, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield, and walked toward the waiting car. She could feel Victor's gaze on her back the entire way, heavy and assessing and impossibly complex. She didn't look back. The driver greeted her politely and pulled away from the estate, leaving the lights and music and danger behind. Lena sat in the back seat, her hands trembling slightly as adrenaline finally caught up with her. She'd survived. She was safe. She would go home and lock her doors and pretend this had never happened. Except as the car merged onto the highway back to the city, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the way Victor had looked at her in those final moments, like he was memorizing her face, cataloging details he might need later. Like this wasn't actually goodbye at all, just an intermission before an act she hadn't agreed to perform. 3 days passed. Lena threw herself into work at the gallery with enough intensity that her boss actually asked if she was feeling all right. She cataloged new acquisitions, updated the website, spent hours reorganizing the storage room and back simply because it gave her something to focus on, besides the persistent memory of dark eyes and controlled violence. She didn't tell anyone what had happened at the wedding. Not Sarah, who'd texted her 3 times asking for details about Victor. Not her mother, who called for their weekly check-in. Not Emily, her best friend from college, who would have immediately insisted Lena file a police report. Because what would she report? That she'd witnessed an assault but couldn't identify the victim or prove it had happened? That she'd been forced to dance with a man who might or might not be connected to organized crime? That she felt simultaneously terrified and fascinated by the entire experience? Number. Better to forget it. Move on. Pretend it had been a strange, surreal nightmare that wouldn't follow her into daylight. That plan worked fine until Wednesday afternoon, when Victor DeLuca walked into her gallery. Lena was in the back office, reviewing consignment contracts, when the door chime announced a visitor. She heard Marcus, the gallery's other employee, greet whoever had entered with his standard welcome spiel about browsing and asking questions. Then she heard Marcus's voice change, become higher, more deferential, almost nervous, and something cold slithered down her spine. She stood and walked to the office door, peering out into the main gallery space. Victor stood in the center of the room, hands in the pockets of another immaculate suit, surveying the artwork on the walls with an expression of polite interest that didn't reach his eyes. He looked completely out of place among the abstract paintings and modern sculptures, too sharp and too dangerous for the deliberately calming aesthetic Lena's boss preferred. Marcus hovered nearby, clearly unsure what to do with a customer who radiated that much controlled menace. Victor's gaze swept the room and landed on Lena with the precision of a targeting laser. "Hello, Lena," he said calmly, as if his presence in her workplace was the most natural thing in the world. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs carried her forward instead, moving on autopilot while her brain tried desperately to catch up. "Mr. DeLuca, this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is." He turned his attention to a painting on the nearest wall, a riot of color and geometric shapes that the artist claimed represented urban anxiety. "Interesting piece. What's it called?" "Disconnection in Transit." Lena's voice sounded distant to her own ears, like she was listening to someone else speak. The artist is exploring themes of isolation within crowded spaces. Victor tilted his head, studying the canvas. "I think it's trying too hard. Real isolation doesn't need to announce itself so loudly." Marcus was watching their exchange with barely concealed confusion, clearly trying to figure out the relationship between his coworker and this intimidating stranger. Lena could practically see the speculation forming behind his eyes. "Marcus," she said, not taking her gaze off Victor, "why don't you take your lunch break? I can handle things here." "You sure? I wasn't supposed to break for another hour." "I'm sure." Marcus hesitated for one more moment, then grabbed his jacket from behind the desk and fled toward the door with obvious relief. The chime announced his departure, and then they were alone. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Lena waited for Victor to explain his presence, to make some demand or threat that would contextualize this violation of the boundaries she'd thought they'd established. Instead, he simply continued examining the art, moving slowly along the wall like a legitimate customer. "Why are you here?" Lena finally asked. "I told you. I was in the neighborhood." "Brooklyn is not a neighborhood you're just passing through." Victor glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You're right. I came specifically to see you." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Because 3 days ago I gave you instructions to forget what you saw and move on with your life, and I wanted to make sure you'd followed those instructions. And if I hadn't, then we'd be having a very different conversation." He moved to another painting, this one a moody seascape done in shades of gray and blue. "But I don't think that's the case. You're smart enough to recognize when discretion is the better part of valor. You came all this way just to confirm I'm keeping my mouth shut?" "I came all this way because loose ends make me uncomfortable," Victor corrected. "And you, Lena Carter, are a very uncertain variable in a situation I prefer to have completely controlled." The admission surprised her, not the content, but the honesty of it. She'd expected threats or manipulation, not this straightforward acknowledgement of his own discomfort. "I'm not going to tell anyone what I saw," Lena said quietly. "Not because you scared me into silence, but because I genuinely don't want to be involved in whatever you do. I just want to go back to my normal life." "I know." Victor turned to face her fully. "Which is what makes you dangerous." "How does wanting to be left alone make me dangerous?" "Because you don't want anything from me. You're not trying to leverage what you know into protection or profit. You're not angling for attention or access to my world. You genuinely just want to forget this happened and move on, which means I can't predict your behavior the way I can predict people who are motivated by greed or fear or ambition." Lena stared at him, trying to process the logic of that statement. "So I'm dangerous because I'm not trying to use you?" "You're an anomaly. And in my experience, anomalies either become assets or threats. There's very little middle ground." "And which do you think I am?" Victor's dark eyes searched her face, looking for something she couldn't identify. "I haven't decided yet." The air between them felt charged, heavy with implications Lena didn't fully understand. She should order him to leave, should tell him that whatever game he was playing, she wanted no part of it. But instead she found herself asking, what happened to the man in the garden? "He's alive. Missing several fingers, but alive." But Victor said it without inflection, like he was reporting the weather. "He won't steal from me again." "You're a monster." "I'm a businessman operating in an industry that doesn't leave room for weakness." He took a step closer to her, closing the distance until Lena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "But I'm not here to defend myself to you, Lena. I'm here because circumstances have created a connection between us, and I need to determine how to manage that connection." There is no connection. We danced once at a wedding, that's all. You saw my face while I was conducting business that could destroy me if made public. You heard my voice giving orders that constitute assault at minimum, possibly conspiracy depending on how creative a prosecutor wanted to get. That creates a connection whether you acknowledge it or not. Lena's heart was hammering against her ribs, but she refused to step back, refused to give ground. So what do you want from me? Another promise to keep quiet? A signed NDA? What? I want you to understand that your safety is now tied to mine, Victor said quietly. That dance at the wedding bought you protection, but that protection is only valuable as long as people believe you matter to me, which means we need to maintain the appearance of a connection. Absolutely not. I'm not asking for a real relationship, Lena, just the occasional public appearance, a dinner here, an event there. Nothing that would significantly disrupt your life, but enough to maintain the fiction that you're under my protection. And if I refuse? Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A hardening, a cooling. Then you become a loose end again. And I handle loose ends. There it was, the threat underneath the reasonable tone, the violence lurking behind the civilized veneer. Lena wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to throw him out of her gallery and file a restraining order and scream until someone listened that Victor DeLuca was a criminal who was trying to force her into some twisted performance of a relationship she wanted no part of. But she was also smart enough to recognize that none of those options ended well for her. How long? She asked, hating the defeat in her own voice. 6 months, maybe a year, until the attention dies down and people stop associating you with me. And then what? Then you go back to being invisible, and I go back to forgetting you exist. It should have been insulting, should have made her angry. Instead, Lena felt an odd pang of something that might have been disappointment, which was insane because she didn't want Victor DeLuca remembering she existed. Did she? Fine, she heard herself say, but I have conditions. Victor's eyebrow rose again, this time with what looked like genuine surprise. You're negotiating. If I'm going to be your fake girlfriend or whatever this is, then yes, I'm negotiating. Lena crossed her arms, armor against the intensity of his gaze. First condition, no actual relationship. This is purely performative. Agreed. Second, you tell me ahead of time when you need me to appear somewhere. No surprise visits to my workplace. Reasonable. Third, she hesitated, then pushed forward. You tell me the truth. About what you do, about what I'm getting involved in. I don't want to be blindsided by something because you decided I didn't need to know. That one gave Victor pause. He studied her for a long moment, something calculating moving behind his expression. Truth is dangerous, Lena. Sometimes ignorance is protection. I'd rather have dangerous truth than comfortable lies. Would you? He stepped even closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the subtle scent of his cologne. Because once you know certain things, you can't unknow them. Once you see how deep the corruption goes, how many powerful people are compromised, how much of the world runs on violence and coercion, you don't get to go back to comfortable ignorance. I already know you're a monster, Lena said, even though her voice had gone quiet, uncertain. How much worse can the truth be? Victor's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You'd be surprised. He held her gaze for one more long moment, then stepped back, the sudden distance feeling like a physical loss. Dinner, he said. Friday night. I'll send a car for you at 7. Wear something nice. We're going somewhere that matters, and I need you to look like you belong at my side. This is insane. This is survival. Victor headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. And Lena, one more thing. What? Try not to fall in love with me. This arrangement works a lot better if we both remember it's just business. Then he was gone, the door chime marking his exit, leaving Lena standing alone in the gallery with her heart racing and her thoughts in complete chaos. She sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. What had she just agreed to? And why did some small, shameful part of her feel almost excited? The car Victor sent wasn't subtle. It was a black Mercedes S-Class with tinted windows and a driver who looked like he moonlighted as a bodyguard, all squared jaw and watchful eyes. He held the door open for Lena without speaking, and she slid into the leather interior feeling like she was stepping into a different world entirely. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready, changing outfits 4 times before settling on a deep burgundy dress that managed to be elegant without trying too hard. Her hands had shaken while applying eyeliner, and she'd had to redo her lipstick twice because the first attempts looked like a child had colored outside the lines. Now, sitting in the back of this obscenely expensive car, Lena wondered if any amount of preparation could make her ready for whatever tonight would bring. The driver navigated through Brooklyn with practiced ease, crossing the bridge into Manhattan as the city lights began to spark against the deepening twilight. Lena watched the familiar landmarks slide past. The skyline she'd seen 1,000 times, the streets she'd walked, the city she thought she knew, and felt like she was seeing it all through new eyes. This was Victor's world, not the sanitized version tourists saw, but the darker machinery underneath, the deals made in expensive restaurants, the power brokered over wine that cost more than her monthly rent, the violence lurking just beneath the surface of civilization. The car pulled up in front of a restaurant Lena recognized from food magazines and celebrity Instagram posts, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance and where the menu didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. The driver opened her door. Lena stepped out onto the sidewalk, her heels clicking against the pavement, and immediately felt underdressed despite the expensive dress. Everyone entering the restaurant looked like they belonged in a different tax bracket, different world, different species entirely. "Ms. Carter!" Victor's voice came from her left, and Lena turned to find him standing near the entrance, somehow looking even more devastating than she remembered. Tonight he wore a charcoal suit with a subtle pinstripe, a crisp white shirt open at the collar, and an expression that suggested this was all perfectly routine. "Mr. DeLuca," she replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Victor, please. We're supposed to be involved. Remember?" He offered his arm, the gesture almost old-fashioned. "Shall we?" Lena took his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric, and let him guide her toward the entrance. The maitre d' greeted Victor by name, his deference just shy of a bow, and led them through the main dining room toward a private section in the back. The restaurant was all dark wood and dim lighting, designed to make conversations intimate and faces beautiful. Each table was positioned for maximum privacy, and Lena noticed that several of the other diners were faces she recognized from news broadcasts and financial magazines. "You come here often?" she asked, as they were seated at a corner table that offered a view of the entire room while keeping them partially shielded by an ornamental screen. "Often enough that they know better than to seat anyone within earshot," Victor replied, accepting a wine menu from the hovering sommelier. "The Barolo, I think. The 2015. "Of course, Mr. DeLuca, an excellent choice." The sommelier disappeared, and Victor turned his attention fully to Lena. "You look beautiful, by the way. I should have said that first. You're trying to make this feel like a real date." "I'm trying to make it look like a real date. There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that unsettling intensity. "Though I meant the compliment. That color suits you." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks and hated herself for it. "Thank you. You're nervous." "I'm sitting across from a man who threatened me into a fake relationship to cover up the fact that I witnessed him ordering an assault. Yes, I'm nervous." Victor's mouth twitched. "Fair enough. But for tonight, try to relax. We're just two people having dinner, nothing sinister about that. Except for the part where it's all a lie designed to make people think I'm under your protection. Also fair." The sommelier returned with the wine, going through an elaborate presentation that Victor waved off with practiced impatience. Once their glasses were poured and they were alone again, he raised his in a small toast. "To mutually beneficial arrangements." Lena touched her glass to his, the crystal chiming softly. "To survival." "I'll drink to that." "To Toto." The wine was extraordinary, rich and complex in ways that made Lena understand why people spent ridiculous amounts of money on bottles. She took another sip, letting it warm her from the inside out, and tried to think of this as just another surreal experience in a week that had already shattered her sense of normal. "So," she said after a moment, "you promised me truth. I'm holding you to that." Victor set down his wine glass, his expression becoming more guarded. What do you want to know? Everything. What you do, who you work for, why that man in the garden deserved to have his fingers broken. All of it. That's a lot of truth for a first date. This isn't a date. It's a performance with an audience. Lena gestured subtly to the rest of the restaurant, where she could feel eyes tracking their table even as people pretended not to notice. So give me my payment for playing along. Tell me what I've actually gotten myself involved in. Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to determine how much she could handle. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a murmur. My family has been in logistics and procurement for 3 generations, he said. Officially, we run shipping companies, warehouses, import-export businesses, all legitimate, all properly licensed and taxed. And unofficially? Unofficially, we facilitate the movement of goods and services that exist outside legal channels, pharmaceuticals that haven't been approved for domestic sale, luxury items that certain people would prefer not to claim on customs declarations, information that shouldn't technically be available but that the right people will pay premium prices to obtain. You're describing smuggling. I'm describing a gray market that exists because official channels are slow, bureaucratic, and often fail to meet the actual needs of people with resources and urgency. But Victor's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining a perfectly reasonable business model. We don't deal in weapons or human trafficking. Those are lines I won't cross. But yes, the core business involves moving things that shouldn't technically be moved. Lena processed that, taking another drink of wine to buy herself time. And the man in the garden? Where does he fit into this perfectly reasonable gray market? He was a warehouse supervisor who thought skimming $50,000 from shipments would go unnoticed. It didn't. Victor's expression hardened. In a business built on trust and discretion, theft is an existential threat. If word got out that someone could steal from me without consequences, every opportunistic employee would start helping themselves. The punishment wasn't about the money. It was about making sure everyone else understood the rules. So you broke his fingers as a lesson to other employees. I broke his fingers as a consequence of his choice to steal. Victor held her gaze, unflinching. I'm not asking you to approve, Lena. You wanted truth, and this is it. I run an organization that operates outside legal boundaries, which means I have to create and enforce my own justice system. It's brutal sometimes, but it's necessary. A waiter appeared to take their order, forcing them to pause the conversation while Victor ordered for both of them in flawless Italian. Lena didn't protest. She had no idea what half the menu items were anyway, and there was something almost hypnotic about watching him slip effortlessly between languages, between the public persona of a successful businessman and whatever he was underneath. Once the waiter retreated, Victor continued. The wedding you attended, that was a strategic alliance. The Castellano family has political connections that my family needs. We have resources they want. The marriage legitimizes the relationship, makes it harder for prosecutors to question why we might have business together. You're talking about corruption. I'm talking about reality. Do you know how many people in positions of power rely on services like mine? Senators who need certain medications their insurance won't cover. Judges who collect art that would raise questions about their declared income. Police commissioners who want security systems that aren't logged in any official database. Victor's smile was sharp, humorless. The difference between me and them is that I'm honest about what I am. They wrap themselves in respectability while profiting from the same gray markets they publicly condemn. Lena wanted to argue with him, to point out that 2 wrongs didn't make a right, that participating in corruption wasn't justified just because others were hypocrites. But she could also see the logic of what he was saying, the uncomfortable truth that the world ran on compromises and moral flexibility that nice people preferred not to examine too closely. Why are you telling me all this? She asked. You could have fed me some sanitized version. Let me think you're just an aggressive businessman with loose ethics. Because you asked for truth, and I don't see the point in half measures. Victor leaned back as their first course arrived, something delicate and artistic that Lena barely registered. And because if you're going to be associated with me, even temporarily, you deserve to understand what that association means. The protection I'm offering is real, but so are the risks. People will make assumptions about you based on your connection to me. Some of those assumptions might put you in uncomfortable positions. What kind of uncomfortable positions? Questions from friends about how we met and what I do. Attention from people who want to use you to get access to me. Possibly surveillance from law enforcement who have been trying for years to find something they can charge me with. He said it all calmly, like he was describing minor inconveniences rather than potential threats to her entire life. Lena's appetite had completely disappeared, but she forced herself to take a bite of whatever delicate creation was on her plate. It tasted like ashes. You're saying the police might investigate me because of this fake relationship? They might. Probably they'll run a background check, realize you're exactly what you appear to be, and lose interest. But yes, there's a possibility that associating with me will bring you attention you'd prefer to avoid. And you're just now mentioning this? I'm mentioning it now that you've demanded complete honesty. Victor ate with the same controlled precision he seemed to apply to everything else, each movement economical and deliberate. Before, I was operating under the assumption that what you didn't know couldn't hurt you. But you were right earlier. Ignorance isn't really protection. It's just a different kind of vulnerability. Their eyes met across the table, and Lena felt that same electric charge she'd experienced at the wedding. The sense that something significant was happening beneath the surface of this conversation, something neither of them was fully acknowledging. I could still walk away, she said quietly. Tell you this is too much, too dangerous, too complicated. You could, Victor agreed, and I would let you go. But we both know what happens then. You go back to being a loose end, and loose ends in my world have a tendency to get tied up in ways that aren't pleasant for anyone involved. So my choices are either play along with this insane arrangement or risk being disappeared by your associates who don't share your restraint. Your choices are to accept temporary protection and minor inconvenience in exchange for certainty that you're safe, or to gamble that being nobody important will be enough to keep you off anyone's radar. Victor set down his fork, giving her his complete attention. I'm not trying to scare you, Lena. I'm trying to make sure you understand the full situation so you can make an informed decision. Lena wanted to scream, wanted to throw her wine in his face and storm out and go back to her small, safe, boring life, where the most dangerous thing she encountered was the occasional aggressive customer at the gallery. But she was also brutally aware that he was right. She'd already seen too much, knew too much, existed too clearly in his world to ever truly go back to complete safety. Fine, she said, hearing the defeat in her own voice. I'll play along, but I want something in return. Victor's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating again. You're asking me to risk my entire life on the assumption that your protection is worth the danger that comes with it. Yes, I'm negotiating. A slow smile spread across his face, the first expression of genuine amusement she'd seen from him. I'm starting to like you, Lena Carter. What do you want? Honesty, real honesty, not just strategic information dumps when I push hard enough. If something changes, if the situation becomes more dangerous, if there's something I need to know, you tell me immediately. No protecting me through ignorance. Victor considered that for a long moment. That's fair. What else? You said 6 months to a year. I want a firm timeline, and I want your word that when this is over, I'm truly done. No lingering obligations, no future favors, no claims on my life. Agreed. Though I should warn you, my word is worth more than most people's contracts, but it's not a legal document. If you want protection after our arrangement ends, you'll need to ask for it explicitly. I won't need it because nobody will remember I exist once you've moved on to your next convenient alibi. Something flickered across Victor's expression, too quick for Lena to identify before his mask of control slid back into place. Probably true. Anything else? Yes. If we're going to do this, you need to teach me how to survive in your world. Not just how to look pretty on your arm at restaurants, but how to recognize danger, how to navigate conversations with dangerous people, how to protect myself if something goes wrong. That surprised him. She could see it in the slight widening of his eyes, the pause before he responded. You want me to train you? I want to not be helpless. If I'm going to be exposed to your world, I want to understand it well enough to survive it without you holding my hand. Lena leaned forward, matching his intensity. You said I'm dangerous because you can't predict my behavior. Make me predictable. Teach me the rules of your world so I can navigate it competently. Victor stared at her for a long moment, something complex moving behind his dark eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, become lower, more intimate, edged with something that might have been respect. You're full of surprises, Lena Carter. Most people in your position would be looking for ways to minimize their exposure. You're asking me to pull you deeper in. I'm asking you to give me agency in a situation where you've taken most of my choices away. There's a difference. Fair enough. He raised his wine glass again, this time with what looked like genuine approval in his expression. I'll teach you. Starting tomorrow night. We'll begin with the basics. How to read a room, how to identify who has real power versus who's pretending, how to extract yourself from dangerous conversations gracefully. Just like that, you're agreeing? I respect competence and clear thinking, even when it comes from someone who has every reason to hate me. You've demonstrated both. Victor's smile turned sharp. Besides, having you actually understand what you're walking into makes you more valuable as a cover and less likely to accidentally say something that gets us both killed. It's practical. The rest of dinner passed in a strange fog of normalcy, punctuated by surreal moments of honesty. They talked about art. Victor had surprisingly informed opinions about contemporary painters. They discussed books, discovering a shared appreciation for classic noir fiction. They even laughed once or twice, though Lena couldn't quite shake the awareness that she was sharing wine and conversation with a man who had casually ordered someone's fingers broken less than a week ago. By the time dessert arrived, she'd consumed enough wine to feel pleasantly buzzed. The edges of her fear softened into something that felt almost like comfort. "Why me?" she asked as Victor paid the check with a black credit card that had no visible numbers. "Why not just find someone already in your world to play this part? Someone who understands the rules and wouldn't need all these negotiations?" Victor considered the question, signing the receipt with a flourish. "Because someone already in my world would have their own agenda, their own family connections, their own ambitions. You're an outsider with no stakes in the power games that everyone else is playing, which makes you safer in some ways. More controllable, more contained." "You mean more disposable?" "I mean more independent. You don't owe loyalty to anyone who might be my enemy. You don't have leverage you're waiting to use against me. You're just a woman who made the mistake of witnessing something she shouldn't have and is now trying to survive the consequences." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "It makes you honest in a way that people in my usual circles can never be." Lena took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. The wine had definitely affected her balance, and she swayed slightly before catching herself. Victor's hand moved to her waist, steadying her with the same controlled strength she remembered from their dance. "Easy," he murmured. "How much did you have to drink?" "Not enough to forget who you are. Too much to pretend I'm not terrified." "Good. Fear will keep you alert. Just don't let it paralyze you." The car was waiting when they emerged from the restaurant, the driver holding the door with the same professional detachment. Victor guided her into the back seat, then slid in beside her, maintaining a careful distance even as the car pulled into traffic. "I'll have you home in 20 minutes, he said, "unless you'd prefer to go somewhere else first." Lena's wine-soaked brain took a moment to process the implications of that offer. "Is that you asking me to sleep with you?" "That's me giving you the option if you wanted to continue the appearance of a relationship somewhere more private. Some of the people from the restaurant will likely mention seeing us together, and if we disappeared to my apartment, it would reinforce the fiction." He said it clinically, like he was discussing business strategy rather than potential intimacy. "Absolutely not." "I didn't think so, but I wanted to make the offer in case you disagreed." Victor pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. "Your answer is actually better for the narrative. Women who sleep with me on the first date look opportunistic. Women who make me work for it look like they actually matter." "You've really thought this through." "I've had practice." He put the phone away, turning his attention back to her. "I'll pick you up tomorrow at 7. Wear something you can move in. We're going somewhere less formal." "Where?" "You'll see when we get there. Consider it your first lesson in trusting me when you don't have complete information." The car wound through Manhattan, then crossed back into Brooklyn, the city lights giving way to the quieter streets of her neighborhood. Lena watched the familiar landmarks pass, feeling like she was returning from a journey much longer than one evening. When they pulled up in front of her building, Victor got out with her, walking her to the door with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with everything else about him. "Thank you for tonight," he said, his voice low enough that the driver couldn't hear. "You played your part well." "Is that what we're calling it? Playing a part?" "What would you call it?" Lena looked up at him, this dangerous, complicated man who had somehow become tangled in her life through pure chance and poor timing. "Survival. Just like you said." Victor reached out, and for one heart-stopping moment, Lena thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, his hand came to rest gently against her cheek, his thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that was almost tender. "Get some sleep, Lena. Tomorrow we start turning you into someone who can survive my world without me protecting you." Then he was gone, sliding back into the car and disappearing into the night, leaving Lena standing on her doorstep with her heart racing and her thoughts in absolute chaos. She climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, kicked off the expensive shoes, and collapsed onto her couch, still wearing the burgundy dress. What had she done? She'd agreed to be trained by a criminal, to learn the rules of a world built on violence and corruption, to spend the next 6 months pretending to be romantically involved with a man who saw her as nothing more than a useful prop in whatever larger game he was playing. It was insane. But as Lena lay there in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of her building settling around her, she couldn't deny the small thrill of excitement that ran through her at the thought of tomorrow night. For the first time in her carefully controlled, deliberately invisible life, Lena Carter was going to learn how to be dangerous. And God help her, she couldn't wait. The next evening arrived faster than Lena expected. She'd spent the day at the gallery unable to focus, her mind cycling between terror and anticipation in equal measure. Marcus had asked twice if she was feeling all right, and she'd blamed a headache rather than admit she was waiting for a crime lord to pick her up for what amounted to training in criminal survival. She'd gone home early, changed into jeans and a fitted black shirt that Victor's cryptic instruction about movement-friendly clothing seemed to call for, and was pacing her apartment when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Outside. V. Lena grabbed her jacket and headed down, finding not the black Mercedes, but a dark gray Audi with Victor in the driver's seat. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight, just dark jeans and a black Henley that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less formal. "Get in," he said through the open window. Lena slid into the passenger seat, pulling on her seatbelt. "No driver tonight?" "No witnesses for tonight's lesson." Victor pulled smoothly into traffic, heading toward the Manhattan Bridge. "What I'm about to show you isn't exactly legal. Should I be worried?" "Only if you plan to report me to the authorities. But we've already established that you're smarter than that." They drove in silence for a while, crossing into Manhattan and heading downtown toward neighborhoods that Lena recognized as transitional, caught between gentrification and decay, where expensive lofts existed side by side with businesses that had been family-owned for 3 generations. Victor parallel parked on a street that looked abandoned, all shuttered warehouses and chain-link fences. "First lesson," he said, killing the engine. "Information is power. The person who knows the most in any situation has the most control, which means you need to learn how to read people and spaces faster than they can read you." He got out of the car. Lena followed, her nerves singing with adrenaline as Victor led her toward what looked like a completely unremarkable warehouse door. He knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and eyes that assessed Lena with the cold precision of a jeweler examining a questionable stone. "Victor?" the woman said. "You didn't mention bringing a guest." "She's with me, Angela, teaching her the basics." Angela's eyebrow rose, but she stepped aside to let them enter. "Your funeral." The warehouse interior had been converted into something that looked like a cross between a boxing gym and a tactical training center. There were mats on the floor, punching bags hanging from exposed beams, and what looked like props for practicing breaking and entering arranged against one wall. And there were people, maybe 24 of them, ranging from college-aged kids to men and women in their 60s, all engaged in various forms of practice that ranged from hand-to-hand combat to picking locks while blindfolded. "What is this place?" Lena whispered. "Think of it as a very specialized gym," Victor replied. "Angela runs it for people in my line of work who need to maintain certain skills. Fighting, evasion, information gathering, basic criminal tradecraft, everything someone might need if they operate outside normal legal channels. He guided Lena across the space toward a corner where a man built like a professional wrestler was showing a teenage girl how to escape a wrist hold. "Marcus," Victor called. "Got time for a beginner?" The man looked up, his expression breaking into a grin when he saw Victor. "Always got time for you. This her?" "This is Lena. Lena, this is Marcus. And yes, I know you work with another Marcus. This one spells it with a C instead of a K, which is somehow important to him." Marcus with a C approached them, his grin fading to professional assessment as he looked Lena over. "Complete beginner?" "Complete civilian," Victor corrected. "But she learns fast and she needs to understand the basics of self-defense." "How basic we talking?" "Basic enough that if someone tries to grab her in a parking lot, she can buy herself time to get away." Marcus nodded slowly. "I can work with that. You staying to watch?" "I have some business to handle. I'll be back in an hour." Victor turned to Lena, his expression serious. "Marcus is going to teach you how to break basic holds and create distance from an attacker. Pay attention, ask questions, and try not to break anything on yourself or him." Then he was walking away, leaving Lena alone with a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. "So," Marcus said cheerfully, "Victor tell you what he does?" "He told me enough to know I should probably be terrified of him." "Smart girl. Terrified is healthy where Victor's concerned, but he's also about the most loyal person I know, so if you're under his protection, you're as safe as it gets in this world." Marcus gestured toward the mats. "Come on, let's start with the most common attack scenario, someone grabbing you from behind." The next hour was simultaneously the most terrifying and empowering experience of Lena's life. Marcus was patient but demanding, walking her through techniques for breaking chokeholds, escaping wrist grabs, and using an attacker's momentum against them. Her body protested movements it had never made before, muscles burning as she practiced the same escapes over and over until they started to feel almost natural. "Good," Marcus said after she'd successfully broken his grip for the third time in a row. "You're thinking too much, but that'll come with practice. The goal is to make this automatic, so automatic that you do it before your brain even registers what's happening." Lena bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. "How long does it take to get that automatic?" "Depends on how much you practice. Some people get there in a few months. Others never quite make it because they can't override their freeze response in a real crisis." He offered her a water bottle from a nearby cooler. "Victor said you witnessed something you shouldn't have. That what brought you into this world?" "More or less." "And now you're what? His girlfriend? His project? His insurance policy?" Lena took a long drink of water, using the moment to figure out how to answer that. "All of the above, I think." Marcus studied her with surprisingly kind eyes for someone who made his living teaching people how to hurt each other. "Word of advice? Victor's a good man by the standards of this world, but this world has pretty low standards. Don't mistake protection for affection, and don't let proximity turn into something more complicated than it needs to be." "We're not," Lena started, then stopped. "It's not like that between us." "Not yet, maybe, but I've known Victor a long time and I've never seen him bring anyone here. Not business associates, not women he's actually dating, nobody. The fact that he brought you means something, even if neither of you knows what yet." Before Lena could figure out how to respond to that, Victor reappeared from wherever he'd disappeared to, his expression darker than when he'd left. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked, reading something in Victor's face that Lena couldn't see. "Fine. Just some complications with the Castellano situation." Victor's eyes found Lena, and some of the hardness in his expression softened slightly. "How'd she do?" "Natural athlete, quick learner, and smart enough to ask good questions. Give her a few more sessions and she'll be able to handle herself in basic scenarios." "Good." Victor extended his hand to Lena. "Come on, there's one more place I want to take you tonight." Lena took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, and tried not to notice how easily he'd lifted her or how warm his palm was against hers. They said their goodbyes to Marcus and Angela, then headed back out to the car. This time when Victor started driving, he headed uptown, leaving the industrial neighborhoods behind for the polished wealth of the Upper East Side. "Where are we going now?" Lena asked. Somewhere you need to see if you're going to understand what you're really involved in. Victor's jaw was tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel with more tension than the smooth traffic required. I'm about to show you exactly how deep the corruption goes. And once you see it, there's no unseeing it. So if you want to back out, to choose ignorance over truth, now's your last chance. Lena thought about that for exactly 3 seconds. Show me. Victor nodded once, then pulled up in front of a building that Lena recognized from countless news broadcasts. One of Manhattan's most exclusive social clubs, the kind of place where senators and CEOs and old money families gathered to make the decisions that shaped the city's future behind closed doors. This, Victor said quietly, is where the real power in this city lives. Not in courtrooms or city hall, but in private dining rooms and invitation-only events. And I'm about to show you exactly how many of the people who publicly condemn men like me are privately on my payroll. He got out of the car, straightening his shirt, and suddenly he looked every inch the dangerous man he actually was, all controlled menace and unshakable confidence. "Stay close to me," he said as Lena joined him on the sidewalk. "Don't speak unless spoken to directly. And whatever you see in there, whatever you hear, show no reaction at all." Then he walked through the doors like he owned the building, and Lena followed him into a world she'd never imagined existed beneath the city's civilized surface. And with every step deeper into Victor DeLuca's world, Lena felt her old life slipping further away, replaced by something darker, more dangerous, and infinitely more complicated than anything she'd ever known. The interior of the club was everything Lena had imagined and worse, all rich mahogany paneling and oil paintings of men whose names appeared in history textbooks, leather chairs that probably cost more than her car, and an atmosphere of entitlement so thick she could taste it like copper on her tongue. A man in a pristine tuxedo materialized from nowhere, greeting Victor with the kind of deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Mr. DeLuca, what a pleasure. Your usual room is available." "Thank you, James, and my guest will need temporary clearance." James's eyes flicked to Lena with barely concealed curiosity, but his professional mask never slipped. "Of course, sir, if the young lady would provide identification." Lena fumbled for her driver's license, watching as James photographed it with practiced efficiency before handing it back. "You're cleared for the evening, Ms. Carter. Please stay with Mr. DeLuca at all times." They moved deeper into the building, past rooms where low conversations and cigar smoke created an atmosphere of conspiracy. Victor led her up a curved staircase to the second floor, down a hallway lined with private dining rooms, and finally into a space that looked like something out of a Gilded Age fantasy: crystal chandelier, table set for 12. Windows overlooking Central Park lit up against the night sky. 4 men were already seated, and Lena's stomach dropped as she recognized 3 of them from news broadcasts: a federal judge, a senior police official, a city councilman who'd built his entire campaign on anti-corruption platforms. And sitting at the head of the table, looking entirely comfortable in the midst of this gathering of public servants, was an older man who radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of absolute power. His hair was steel gray, his suit probably cost $10,000, and his eyes tracked Lena with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Victor," the older man said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an Italian accent. "You're late." "Traffic, Uncle Sal." "My apologies." Victor's hand settled on the small of Lena's back, guiding her forward. "Gentlemen, this is Lena Carter. Lena, my Uncle Salvatore DeLuca, Judge Morrison, Deputy Commissioner Chen, and Councilman Bradley." The men nodded politely, though their eyes held varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Lena forced herself to smile, to appear calm, to show absolutely no reaction to the fact that she was standing in a room with public officials who were apparently comfortable having private meetings with the DeLuca crime family. "Ms. Carter," Judge Morrison said, his voice carrying the measured tones of someone accustomed to being listened to. "What an unexpected pleasure. Victor rarely brings guests to these gatherings." "I'm honored to be included," Lena managed, the lie sitting bitter on her tongue. "Sit," Salvatore commanded, gesturing to the chairs beside Victor. "We have business to discuss, and I'd prefer to eat while we talk. The chef here does an excellent osso buco." Lena sat, Victor settling beside her with the ease of someone completely comfortable in this surreal tableau. Waiters appeared with wine and appetizers, moving through the room with the silent efficiency of people trained to see nothing and remember less. "Now then," Salvatore continued once everyone had been served, "the Castellano wedding went well, I trust?" "Very well," Victor replied. "The alliance is solid. Marco understands the terms, and his family is already facilitating the connections we discussed." "Good. And the issue with the warehouse supervisor?" "Resolved. He won't be a problem going forward." Salvatore's eyes glinted with something cold and satisfied. "You broke his hands?" "Fingers." "As agreed." A measured response. "I'm proud of you, nephew. Your father would have killed the man outright. You're learning the value of restraint." Salvatore turned his attention to the judge. "And you, Morrison, any movement on the Ramirez case?" Judge Morrison set down his wine glass carefully. "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month. Based on the evidence the prosecution has, or rather, doesn't have thanks to certain files going missing, I expect to grant the defense motion to dismiss." "Excellent. The Ramirez family has been very generous with their contributions to various charitable causes I support. I'd hate to see their son railroaded by an overzealous prosecutor." Lena's fingers tightened around her own wine glass, her mind reeling. She was listening to a judge casually discuss dismissing a case based on evidence that had been deliberately destroyed. This wasn't just corruption, it was the entire justice system being perverted for the benefit of people with money and connections. Deputy Commissioner Chen spoke up next, his voice quiet but carrying an undercurrent of tension. "We have a problem. That reporter from the Times is still digging into the waterfront development contracts. She's gotten close enough to the money trail that my people are concerned." "How close?" Victor asked, his tone sharpening. "Close enough to know that certain permits were approved without proper environmental review. Close enough to start asking questions about who benefited from the fast-tracking." Salvatore waved a dismissive hand. "Handle it, quietly. I don't want another scandal. The last one cost us 3 months of progress while the public hand-wringing played out." "Define handle it," the commissioner said carefully. "Discredit her. Find something in her background we can leak to her editors. An affair, financial irregularities, plagiarism, I don't care what. Make her toxic enough that the paper won't want to publish anything she writes." Salvatore's smile was thin and cruel. "If that doesn't work, we'll discuss alternative approaches." Lena felt sick. They were talking about destroying a woman's career, possibly her life, simply because she was doing her job as a journalist. And they were discussing it over wine and appetizers like it was a minor inconvenience to be managed. Victor's hand found hers under the table, his fingers squeezing once in what might have been warning or comfort or both. Lena forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression neutral, to be the invisible observer Victor had told her to be. Councilman Bradley cleared his throat. "The vote on the rezoning proposal is scheduled for next week. I've secured the necessary support, but it's going to be close. Some of my colleagues are getting nervous about the optics." "The optics," Salvatore repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Tell your nervous colleagues that the campaign contributions they've enjoyed for the past 3 years came from somewhere. Tell them that loyalty is a two-way street, and those who forget that tend to find themselves facing primary challengers with very deep pockets." "I'll convey the message more diplomatically," Bradley said, his discomfort visible despite his attempt to maintain composure. The conversation continued through 3 more courses, each dish more elaborate than the last, each topic of discussion revealing another layer of corruption woven through the city's power structure. Contracts awarded to companies that kicked back percentages to the De Luca family. Regulations selectively enforced to punish competitors and protect allies. Public officials who'd been systematically compromised through a combination of bribes, blackmail, and carefully cultivated dependencies. Lena sat through it all, her appetite completely gone, forcing herself to take occasional sips of wine just to have something to do with her shaking hands. Victor had warned her that the corruption went deep, but she hadn't truly understood what that meant until tonight. This wasn't a few bad actors taking bribes. This was a systematic subversion of every institution meant to protect the public interest, all orchestrated by men who treated civic duty as a joke and public service as an opportunity for private profit. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably closer to 90 minutes, Salvatore pushed back from the table. "Gentlemen, this has been productive as always. Morrison, I trust you'll keep me informed about the Ramirez case. Commissioner, handle that reporter problem before it becomes my problem. Bradley, make sure that vote goes the right way." The men stood, shaking hands and exchanging the kind of false pleasantries that powerful people use to maintain the illusion of collegiality. Victor stood as well, drawing Lena up beside him with a hand on her elbow. "Uncle Sal, always a pleasure," Victor said. Salvatore's eyes moved to Lena, assessing her with the same cold calculation she'd felt when she first entered the room. "Walk with me, nephew. Your friend can wait in the library." It wasn't a request. Victor's jaw tightened fractionally, but he nodded. "Of course. Lena, James will show you to the library. I'll be there shortly." Lena found herself being guided out of the dining room by the same tuxedoed attendant, down another hallway to a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that probably no one ever read. James gestured to a chair near the fireplace, then disappeared, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the crushing weight of what she'd just witnessed. She'd asked for truth. Victor had delivered it with devastating completeness. This was his world, a world where justice was for sale, where power trumped principle, where the systems ordinary people trusted to protect them were actually mechanisms for the wealthy to protect themselves, and she'd agreed to become part of it, at least temporarily. Lena was still sitting there, staring into the unlit fireplace, when Victor appeared in the doorway 15 minutes later. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Come on," he said quietly. "We're leaving." Lena followed him out of the club, neither of them speaking until they were back in the car and pulling into traffic. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything Lena wanted to say and didn't know how to articulate. "You're angry," Victor finally said. "I'm horrified." Lena turned to look at him, all the emotions she'd been suppressing for the past 2 hours finally breaking through. "Those men, they're supposed to protect people, to serve the public, and instead they're taking orders from your uncle like he's some kind of king, and they're courtiers hoping for favors. That's exactly what they are. That's not a justification, Victor. That's an indictment of the entire system." "I never said it was justification. You asked for truth, and I showed you the truth. That the system you think exists, the one where justice is blind and public servants are honorable, that's a fairy tale they sell to keep people compliant. The real system is exactly what you saw tonight." Victor's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, and that somehow made it worse. He wasn't defending the corruption or celebrating it. He was simply acknowledging it as an objective reality, the way someone might acknowledge that water flows downhill. "How do you live with yourself?" Lena asked, and there was no accusation in the question, just genuine bewilderment. "Knowing that you're part of something this rotten?" Victor was quiet for a long moment, navigating through traffic with the same controlled precision he applied to everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, edged with something that might have been weariness. "I was born into this, Lena. My grandfather started the family business. My father expanded it. My uncle runs it now, and someday, assuming I survive that long, I'll take over. I didn't choose this world. It chose me. You could walk away. Could I?" He glanced at her, something bleak moving behind his dark eyes. "Where would I go? What would I do? I have no legitimate skills, no college degree, no references that don't connect back to criminal enterprises. And even if I could walk away, the knowledge I have about people like Judge Morrison and Commissioner Chen, that knowledge makes me dangerous. Men don't let dangerous people simply disappear into comfortable retirement. So you're trapped. I'm realistic about my options, which isn't the same thing as being trapped. It's just acknowledging the boundaries of the world I operate in." Victor pulled up in front of Lena's building, putting the car in park but not killing the engine. "I know what I am. I don't pretend to be noble or heroic. But within the constraints of this world, I try to be less monstrous than I could be. I don't deal in weapons or trafficking. I don't target civilians who haven't wronged me. I follow a code, even if that code wouldn't make sense to people outside this life." Lena stared at him, this complicated, dangerous man who was somehow both monster and victim of the same corrupt system he perpetuated. "Is that supposed to make me feel better about what I saw tonight?" It's supposed to help you understand that morality in my world exists on a different spectrum than morality in yours. I'm not asking you to approve, just to understand the difference. I understand that you're all complicit in destroying the institutions that are supposed to protect ordinary people. I understand that while you're having expensive dinners and making backroom deals, people are suffering because judges dismiss cases for money and police look the other way when it's profitable. You're right. Victor's admission surprised her. Everything you just said is true. The system is corrupt, and I profit from that corruption. But the corruption existed long before my family started exploiting it, and it'll exist long after we're gone. We didn't create this. We just learned how to navigate it. That's a coward's excuse. That's a survivor's reality. Victor turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, Lena saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. You want me to be ashamed? I am. You want me to wish I could be different? I do. But wishing doesn't change anything, and shame doesn't pay the bills or protect the people who depend on me for their livelihoods. So I do what I do, and I try to sleep at night by telling myself I'm better than the alternatives. The honesty of it hit Lena like a physical blow. This wasn't a villain gleefully reveling in his evil. It was a man trapped in a role he'd never chosen, trying to find some shred of decency in a fundamentally indecent situation. It didn't excuse what he did, but it made him human in a way that Lena hadn't been prepared for. I need time to process this, she said quietly. All of it. Take whatever time you need. But Lena? Victor waited until she met his eyes. What you saw tonight, that's not even the worst of it. That was the sanitized version, the polite corruption of men in expensive suits making genteel arrangements. There are darker corners of this world, places where the violence isn't abstract or theoretical. And the protection I'm offering you means keeping you away from those corners, but only if you're smart enough not to go looking for them. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Curiosity in my world doesn't kill cats. It kills civilians who think they're brave enough to handle truths they're not equipped to process. He reached across and opened her door from the inside. Go get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow. Lena got out of the car on unsteady legs, then turned back before closing the door. Victor? That reporter the commissioner mentioned, the one from the Times. You're not going to let them destroy her, are you? Victor's expression was unreadable in the dim light from the street lamps. I don't control what my uncle does. But you could warn her, anonymously, give her a chance to protect herself. And in doing so, reveal that someone in that room has loose lips and a conscience, which would start an investigation that would end with people getting hurt, possibly including you, if they trace the leak back to tonight's dinner. Victor's voice was gentle but implacable. I'm sorry, Lena, but that reporter's problems aren't mine to solve, and attempting to solve them would create worse problems for everyone involved, including you, especially me. Lena wanted to argue, to insist that he had a moral obligation to help, to do something other than stand by while an innocent woman's life was destroyed for doing her job. But she could also see the calculus Victor was making, the cold arithmetic of risk and consequence that governed every decision in his world. I don't know how you live with these choices, she said finally. Some days, neither do I. Victor pulled the door closed, sealing himself back in the car, and drove away before Lena could find any response to that devastating admission. She climbed the stairs to her apartment in a daze, unlocked her door, and collapsed on her couch, still fully dressed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah asking about her dinner with Victor, but Lena couldn't bring herself to respond. What would she say? That she'd spent the evening watching public officials take orders from organized crime? That she'd discovered the man she was fake dating was trapped in a life he seemed to hate but couldn't escape? That some part of her, despite everything, was starting to understand him in ways that terrified her? Lena turned off her phone and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she started to drift off, she saw Judge Morrison's face discussing the dismissal of a case like it was a business transaction. Commissioner Chen planning to destroy a journalist's career. Her uncle Salvatore orchestrating it all with the casual authority of someone who'd never faced real consequences for anything in his entire life. And Victor, caught in the middle of it all, neither hero nor pure villain, but something infinitely more complicated. Dawn was breaking when Lena finally fell into fitful sleep, her dreams full of dark rooms and men in expensive suits and the crushing weight of truths she couldn't unlearn. The next 2 weeks passed in a surreal blur. Victor took her to 3 more events: a gallery opening where she met artists who unknowingly sold pieces through money laundering schemes, a charity gala where the donations were tax fraud vehicles, and a private dinner with shipping executives who were all paying protection money to the DeLuca family. Each event peeled back another layer of the sanitized corruption that ran through the city's upper echelons, and each one left Lena feeling more compromised simply by witnessing it. But he also continued her training. 3 nights a week, Victor picked her up and took her to Angela's warehouse, where Marcus taught her increasingly complex self-defense techniques, while other instructors showed her how to pick simple locks, how to spot surveillance, how to read body language to identify threats before they materialized. Lena discovered she was good at it. The physical training quieted something anxious in her mind, and the tactical skills gave her a sense of control she'd never experienced before. She started walking differently, more aware of her surroundings, more confident in her ability to handle unexpected situations. The gallery manager noticed. "You seem different lately," he observed one afternoon as Lena was cataloging new acquisitions. "More, I don't know, present?" "I've been working out," Lena said, which was technically true even if it wildly understated what she'd actually been doing. Her friendship with Sarah had become strained. Sarah kept asking questions about Victor, where they'd met, how serious it was, whether Lena had met his family. Lena deflected with vague answers that seemed to satisfy Sarah's curiosity without revealing anything substantive, but the lies of omission accumulated like weights on her chest. She was living a double life now: gallery employee and artist by day, criminal's protege by night. And the line between those two identities was becoming increasingly blurred. It was during her 6th training session that everything changed. Lena was working with Marcus on close-quarters defense when she noticed Victor across the warehouse, talking urgently into his phone. His expression was darker than she'd ever seen it, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. He ended the call and crossed the space toward them with long, angry strides. "We need to leave," he said tersely. "Now!" Lena grabbed her jacket without question, following Victor out to where he'd parked the Audi. He didn't speak until they were blocks away from the warehouse, his hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles showed white. "What happened?" Lena finally asked. "The Koreans made a move, hijacked one of our shipments coming through Newark and killed 2 of my men." Victor's voice was flat, emotionless in the way that suggested he was containing something violent. "It's a declaration of war." Lena's stomach dropped. "Or? Territory dispute. The Kim family has been trying to expand into shipping routes we control. My uncle's been negotiating with them for months, trying to reach an accommodation. Apparently they decided negotiations were taking too long." "What does that mean for—" Lena hesitated, not sure how to phrase the question. "For us, it means things are about to get very dangerous, very quickly. The Kims know that public perception matters, that people associated with the DeLuca family are easier targets than actual DeLuca family members, because killing them sends a message without starting a blood feud." Victor took a corner too fast, the tires squealing. "It means the protection I've been offering you just became a liability. People who want to hurt me might decide hurting you is an effective way to do it." Terror spiked through Lena's chest. "You're saying I'm in danger because of our fake relationship?" "I'm saying you're in danger because the Kims might think our relationship is real, which makes you valuable as leverage." Victor pulled up in front of her building, putting the car in park, but leaving the engine running. "Pack a bag, enough for a week. You're not staying here tonight." "Where am I going?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere the Kims can't find you while we sort this out." Lena's mind was racing, trying to process what he was saying. "You want me to just, disappear? Leave my job, my life, everything? I want you to stay alive." Victor turned to face her, and there was something fierce and almost desperate in his expression. "This isn't a game anymore, Lena. Those men who died tonight, they were professionals, trained to handle themselves in dangerous situations, and they're still dead. You're a civilian who's had exactly 6 self-defense lessons. If the Kims come after you, you won't survive." "This is insane. I didn't sign up for gang warfare." "You signed up when you agreed to be publicly associated with me. I warned you there would be risks. Now those risks are real and immediate, and I'm trying to keep you alive." Victor's voice softened slightly. "Please, Lena, trust me. Pack a bag. Come with me. Let me protect you until this is resolved." Lena stared at him, this dangerous man who was offering protection that came with its own set of threats, and tried to figure out what the right choice was. She could refuse, insist on staying in her apartment, call the police, and try to explain that she'd accidentally become tangled in organized crime and needed protection. But she'd seen how deep the corruption went, knew that half the police force was probably on the DeLuca payroll. And the truth was that Victor had kept every promise he'd made to her so far, had been honest even when honesty revealed ugly truths. "1 week," she said finally, "and then we figure out a different solution, because I can't live like this, can't just disappear every time something dangerous happens in your world." "1 week," Victor agreed. "Now go pack." Lena went upstairs and threw clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands, her mind still reeling. She texted her boss that a family emergency had come up and she'd need a few days off. Texted Sarah that she was fine but needed some space. Then she turned off her phone, grabbed the bag, and went back downstairs to where Victor was waiting. He put her bag in his trunk, then held the passenger door open for her. "Ready?" "No," Lena said honestly. "But I don't think that matters anymore." "Smart woman." Victor closed her door, walked around to the driver's side, and pulled into traffic heading north out of the city. They drove in silence for over an hour, leaving Brooklyn behind for the suburbs, then the suburbs for increasingly rural landscape. Lena watched the city lights disappear in the rearview mirror and felt like she was crossing some threshold she couldn't name, leaving behind the last remnants of her old life and stepping fully into the dangerous world that had claimed her. Finally, Victor turned off the main highway onto a private road that wound through thick woods. The road ended at a gate that opened automatically as they approached, then closed behind them with mechanical finality. Beyond the gate, the trees opened up to reveal a house that was part fortress and part luxury retreat, stone and glass and architectural angles that suggested both beauty and defensibility. Lights glowed from within, and Lena could see the silhouettes of at least 2 men moving past windows. "What is this place?" she asked. "My uncle's safe house. He uses it when things get complicated and he needs to disappear for a while." Victor parked near the entrance, killing the engine. There are guards on the perimeter, security systems that would make a paranoid dictator jealous, and enough supplies to last months if necessary. "You'll be safe here." He got her bag from the trunk and led her inside, where warmth and the smell of cooking food greeted them. A woman in her 60s appeared from what looked like the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Victor, good. I made up the blue room like you asked." Her eyes moved to Lena with open curiosity. "And this must be your young lady." "Mrs. Chen, this is Lena Carter." "Lena, Mrs. Chen keeps this place running and makes the best lasagna in 3 states. Mrs. Chen beamed. "Flattery will get you an extra serving. Come, dear, let me show you to your room. You look exhausted." Lena followed Mrs. Chen up a curved staircase to the 2nd floor, down a hallway lined with expensive art, and into a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the darkened forest. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, and an ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub that could probably fit 3 people. "There are clothes in the closet if you need anything," Mrs. Chen said, setting Lena's duffel on a bench at the foot of the bed. "Victor keeps sizes for guests. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes if you're hungry." Then she was gone, leaving Lena alone in this beautiful prison. Lena walked to the windows, staring out at the darkness beyond, and tried to process how her life had reached this point. 3 weeks ago, she'd been nobody important, living her small life in peaceful anonymity. Now she was hiding in a crime lord's safe house because a rival gang might try to kill her to send a message. It was insane. All of it. But as Lena stood there, watching her reflection in the dark glass, she realized something that should have terrified her but instead felt almost like relief. She didn't want to go back. Didn't want to return to being invisible, unimportant, safe but completely powerless. Whatever was happening to her, whatever dangerous transformation Victor had catalyzed, she was more alive now than she'd ever been in her carefully controlled existence. And that was perhaps the most dangerous realization of all. Lena found Victor in what Mrs. Chen called the study, a room lined with books and maps, a massive desk cluttered with papers and laptops, and windows that overlooked the property's gated entrance. He was on the phone speaking rapid Italian, his voice sharp with authority, and he held up one finger when he saw her in the doorway, signaling her to wait. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. There was something mesmerizing about seeing Victor in his element, the way he commanded respect with tone alone, the efficiency of his movements as he pulled up files on one laptop while typing notes on another, the absolute certainty in every decision he made. This wasn't the man who took her to expensive dinners or taught her about his corrupt world. This was the crime lord, the strategist, the dangerous force that people feared. He ended the call and looked up at her, some of the hardness leaving his expression. "You should be resting." "I'm not tired. I'm terrified and angry and confused, but not tired." Lena stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "Tell me what's happening, the real version, not the sanitized explanation you gave me in the car." Victor studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. This is going to take a while." Lena sat, and Victor leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. The Kim family controls most of the drug distribution in the tri-state area. They're ruthless, well-organized, and they've been expanding aggressively for the past 5 years. My family doesn't touch drugs. It's one of the few lines we won't cross. But we do control shipping routes and warehouse space that the Kims need to move their product efficiently. So they rent from you. They did. But 6 months ago, they decided they wanted to own rather than rent. Started making moves to acquire their own infrastructure, cutting us out of the supply chain entirely. My uncle saw it as a business decision, annoying but not worth going to war over. So we negotiated. Offered them better rates, more favorable terms, tried to find an accommodation that would keep everyone profitable. Victor's jaw tightened. Apparently they were negotiating in bad faith, using the talks to gather intelligence about our operations while planning this move. Tonight's hijacking wasn't opportunistic. It was coordinated, precise, and designed to hurt us where we're most vulnerable. Your men who died, Marco and James, both good men. Both married with families who are going to get very generous settlements that won't come close to compensating for the loss. There was grief in Victor's voice, carefully contained but unmistakable. The Kims killed them to send a message that they're done negotiating, that they're taking what they want regardless of our objections. Lena absorbed that, her stomach churning. And now what? You retaliate. This escalates into full gang warfare? That's what the Kims are expecting. They think we'll strike back hard and fast, which will give them justification to escalate further, which eventually ends with law enforcement getting involved and both families taking losses while the Kims consolidate territory during the chaos. Victor shook his head. But my uncle didn't survive 40 years in this business by being predictable. He's planning something else. What? I don't know yet. He's keeping the strategy close until he's ready to move. Victor's expression darkened. Which is why you're here. Whatever happens next, it's going to be dangerous and complicated, and I can't protect you if you're living in an apartment with minimal security in a neighborhood where anyone with basic surveillance skills could track your movements. So I'm bait, or collateral, or you're someone I refuse to let become a casualty in a war you never asked to be part of. Victor's voice was fierce, almost angry. The Kims don't know you, Lena. They don't know if you're genuinely important to me or just another woman I've been seen with publicly. But they might decide to test that question by grabbing you and seeing if I pay ransom. Or they might kill you just to prove they can strike at people in my orbit without consequence. I'm not willing to take that risk. The intensity in his gaze made Lena's breath catch. This wasn't cold calculation or strategic positioning. This was something raw and personal, something that looked almost like fear beneath the controlled exterior. You actually care, she said quietly. This isn't just about protecting your asset or maintaining appearances. You care what happens to me. Victor looked away, his jaw working. Don't mistake strategic interest for affection. I'm not. I'm recognizing genuine emotion underneath the strategy. Lena leaned forward, trying to catch his eye. Victor, when did this stop being a convenient arrangement for you? It hasn't stopped being convenient. That's not what I asked. He was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk in the only outward sign of agitation. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. You asked me once why I chose you instead of someone already in my world. I told you it was because you had no agenda, no connections, no leverage to use against me. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. Then what was? You looked at me in that garden like I was a monster, not with fear exactly, but with absolute clarity about what I was. And then you kissed me anyway. Victor's dark eyes found hers again. Most people in my life either pretend not to see the violence or they're so immersed in it themselves that it doesn't register as abnormal. You saw it clearly and still chose to engage rather than run. That kind of courage is rare. Lena's heart was pounding. That wasn't courage. That was panic and terrible decision-making. Maybe, but in the weeks since, you've had plenty of opportunities to walk away. To tell me this was too much, too dangerous, too far outside your comfort zone. And every time you've chosen to push deeper instead, to learn instead of hide, to understand instead of judge. His expression softened slightly. You're nothing like I expected, Lena Carter, and that's become a problem. Why is it a problem? Because I was supposed to use you as convenient cover and then forget you existed. I wasn't supposed to actually give a damn whether you survived this. Victor stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the darkness. But somewhere between teaching you to defend yourself and watching you process the corruption without losing your moral center, I started caring, which makes you a vulnerability I can't afford. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed ready to fully explore. Lena stood and crossed to where Victor was standing, stopping just behind him. So what do we do about it? She asked. I don't know. In my world, vulnerabilities get exploited. Caring about someone makes you weak, gives your enemies leverage, creates risks that rational people avoid. He turned to face her, and there was something almost desperate in his expression. I should send you away, put you on a plane to somewhere safe and distant, make sure you're protected but removed from my life entirely. But you won't. No, because apparently I'm not as rational as I thought. Victor reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with one hand. His palm was warm against her cheek, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. This is a mistake. Everything about this is a mistake. Probably, Lena agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm not running. Not from the Kims, not from your world, and not from this. She wasn't sure which of them moved first. Maybe they both did, closing the distance simultaneously, meeting in a kiss that was nothing like the desperate, fear-fueled contact they'd shared at the wedding. This was deliberate, inevitable, and far more dangerous than any gang war. Victor kissed her like a man who'd been restraining himself for weeks and had finally stopped fighting it. His other hand came up to tangle in her hair, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Lena's hands found his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt, and she kissed him back with equal intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. This complicates everything. I know. It makes you an actual target instead of a theoretical one. I know that too, and I still can't promise you safety, or a future, or anything resembling a normal relationship. Good, Lena said, surprising them both. Because I don't want normal anymore. Normal was being invisible and powerless. This, whatever this is, at least it's real. Victor pulled back to look at her, something like wonder crossing his usually guarded features. You're extraordinary. You know that? I'm terrified and in way over my head. That too, but also extraordinary. He kissed her again, softer this time, almost tentative. Then he stepped back, putting deliberate distance between them. We should stop, before this goes somewhere we're not ready for. Lena wanted to argue, to close the distance again and damn the consequences. But she could also see the wisdom in restraint. Everything between them was already complicated enough without adding physical intimacy to the mix. Okay, she said. But Victor, this conversation isn't over. I know. He smiled, and it transformed his face completely, made him look younger, less burdened by the weight of his choices. Go get some rest. Tomorrow we figure out how to survive this war, and you're going to need all your training. Lena left him in the study and returned to her borrowed bedroom, her lips still tingling and her heart racing. She should be terrified, should be planning how to escape the situation before it consumed her completely. Instead, she lay in the enormous bed staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of that kiss, every word of Victor's reluctant admission that he cared. She'd fallen for a monster, or maybe he wasn't a monster after all, just a man trapped in a monstrous situation, trying to find some shred of decency in an indecent world. Either way, Lena was in too deep to turn back now. The next morning arrived with brilliant sunlight streaming through the massive windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. Lena showered, found clothes in the closet that fit well enough, and made her way to the kitchen where Mrs. Chen was preparing what looked like enough breakfast to feed a small army. "Good morning, dear. Coffee?" "Please." Lena accepted a mug gratefully, taking a long sip of the strong, perfect brew. "Is Victor up?" "He never went to sleep. He's been on the phone and computer all night, coordinating with his uncle." Mrs. Chen cracked eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. "That boy works himself too hard. Always has, even when he was young. Too much responsibility, too early." "How long have you known him?" "Since he was 8 years old and his uncle brought him here after his father died. Salvatore wanted to send him to boarding school, but Victor refused to leave. Said the family business was his inheritance and he needed to learn it properly." Mrs. Chen's expression was fond despite the sadness in her voice. "He grew up too fast. Never had a real childhood. Just tactical lessons disguised as games and business meetings instead of birthday parties." The image that painted a grieving 8-year-old forced into his father's world before he was ready made Lena's chest ache. That's awful. That's the life he was born into. But you know what I've noticed in the past few weeks? Mrs. Chen turned to look at Lena directly. He's been smiling again. Actually smiling, not just the business expression he uses for meetings. And he talks about you when he calls to check in. Never anything too personal, but I can hear it in his voice. You're important to him. Before Lena could figure out how to respond to that, Victor appeared in the kitchen doorway looking exhausted but alert. "Morning. I see Mrs. Chen has already started interrogating you." "Not interrogating, informing." Mrs. Chen pointed a spatula at him. "Sit down and eat. You look terrible." Victor obeyed without argument, dropping into the chair beside Lena and accepting the plate of eggs and toast that Mrs. Chen set in front of him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just eat. You too, Lena. I won't have either of you fainting from hunger on my watch." They ate in companionable silence, the domesticity of the moment surreal given everything else happening around them. Finally, Mrs. Chen bustled off to handle something in another part of the house, leaving them alone. "So," Lena said quietly, "what's the plan?" Victor set down his coffee mug, his expression becoming serious. "My uncle has decided on a strategy. We're not retaliating directly against the Kims. Instead, we're cutting off their supply chain at the source." "What does that mean?" "It means we've contacted their suppliers in Mexico and offered them better terms to switch their loyalty to a different distribution network, one that we control through intermediaries. Without product to move, the Kim's entire operation collapses from the inside." Lena processed that. "That's brilliant. It neutralizes them without open warfare." "That's the theory. In practice, it's risky as hell. The Kims will figure out what we're doing eventually, and when they do, they're going to strike back hard, which is why you need to stay here, where you're protected, until this resolves one way or another." "How long will that take? Days? Maybe weeks?" Victor reached across and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I know you hate feeling trapped, but this is the safest option until we know how the Kims are going to respond." "And what are you going to be doing while I'm hiding here?" "Coordinating the supply chain transition, meeting with our Mexican contacts, making sure the Kims can't find alternative sources." He paused. "Being very visible in the city so they focus their attention on me instead of looking for you." Fear spiked through Lena's chest. "You're making yourself bait." "I'm making myself the obvious target, so you're not." Victor's expression was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather rather than deliberately putting himself in danger. "This is my world, Lena. My fight. You shouldn't have to be part of it." "Except I already am part of it. You said so yourself last night. I'm a vulnerability now." Lena gripped his hand tighter. So don't pretend you're doing this to protect some innocent civilian. You're doing this because you care, and that matters. Something shifted in Victor's eyes. Acknowledgement, maybe, or resignation to the truth of what was happening between them. Yes, I care, which is exactly why I need you to stay here where I know you're safe while I handle the dangerous work. That's not fair. No, it's not. But it's necessary. He stood, pulling her up with him and into his arms. Lena went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and breathing in the scent of him, coffee and expensive cologne, and something uniquely Victor. I need to go, but I'll call every day. And the moment this is resolved, I'm coming back for you. Promise? I promise. Victor tilted her chin up, kissing her with a fierce tenderness that made Lena's knees weak. Then he was pulling away, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. Mrs. Chen will take care of you. The guards know you're here and under my protection. And if anything happens, anything at all that makes you uncomfortable, you call me immediately. Then he was gone, the sound of his car engine fading into the distance, and Lena was left alone in the safe house with nothing but her thoughts and the crushing weight of fear for a man she'd somehow fallen for despite every logical reason not to. The next 4 days passed in a strange limbo. Lena tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. She read books from the extensive library, helped Mrs. Chen with cooking, even did some sketching from the windows overlooking the forest. But underneath the surface calm, anxiety gnawed at her constantly. Victor called every evening like clockwork, updating her on the progress of his uncle's strategy. The Mexican suppliers had agreed to the switch. The Kims were scrambling to find alternative sources, but coming up empty. Their distribution network was starting to fracture as dealers realized product wasn't flowing reliably anymore. It's working, Victor told her on the fourth night, his voice carrying exhaustion even through the phone. The Kims are hemorrhaging money and influence. Another week and they'll be too weak to pose a real threat. And you? Are you safe? Safe enough. They've made a few moves, nothing I couldn't handle. He said it casually, but Lena heard the edge underneath. Something had happened, something Victor wasn't telling her. What aren't you saying? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, they tried to grab me outside my apartment 2 nights ago. 4 men, professional setup. It didn't go well for them. Lena's blood ran cold. You were attacked, and you're only telling me now? I didn't want you to worry. Too late. I've been worried since the moment you left. Lena paced her bedroom, the phone pressed hard against her ear. Come here, please. You said this place was safe, so come stay here instead of making yourself a target every night. I can't. If I disappear, the Kims will know something's wrong and they'll get desperate. Desperate people make reckless moves. Victor's voice softened. I know this is hard, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing. I trust your competence. I'm questioning your self-preservation instincts. That earned her a low chuckle. Fair enough, but Lena, I need you to know, whatever happens, getting you tangled up in this was the best mistake I've ever made. The line went dead before she could respond, leaving Lena staring at her phone and trying not to scream with frustration. She barely slept that night, her mind conjuring worst-case scenarios with vivid detail. Every sound outside her window made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. By the time dawn broke, she'd convinced herself that something terrible had happened and Victor was lying dead somewhere while she hid in useless safety. So when Victor's car pulled up the drive at 8 in the morning, Lena nearly collapsed with relief. She ran downstairs and out the front door, not caring that she was still in pajamas or that the guards were watching with undisguised interest. Victor got out of the car looking like he'd been through hell, bruised knuckles, a cut above his left eyebrow, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. You're alive, Lena breathed, stopping just in front of him. Disappointed? Victor's attempt at humor fell flat, undermined by how bone-tired he looked. Furious. Terrified. Relieved. Lena reached up to touch the cut on his eyebrow gently. What happened? The Kims made their move last night. Tried to hit our main warehouse, thinking they could disrupt operations enough to buy themselves time. Victor caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. They failed. Badly. Lost 8 men in the attempt, and we captured 3 more who are currently having very informative conversations with my uncle's interrogators. Is it over? Almost. The Kims are broken. No product, no money, no leverage. They'll either surrender territory and sue for peace, or they'll make one last desperate play that ends with them all in prison or dead. Victor's thumb traced her jaw. Either way, you're safe. The threat is neutralized. Relief flooded through Lena so intensely it made her dizzy. Then why do you look like you're about to deliver bad news? Victor's expression shuddered. Because I am. My uncle wants to meet you, officially, tonight. Why is that bad news? Because meeting Salvatore means you're no longer just someone I'm publicly associated with. It means you're being evaluated as a permanent fixture in my life. And if he decides you're acceptable, you'll be drawn deeper into the family in ways that will be very hard to extract yourself from later. Victor's voice was heavy with something that sounded like regret. I can refuse. Tell him you're not interested in permanent entanglement. Give you the exit I promised. Lena looked at this dangerous, complicated man who'd somehow become the center of her world in just a few short weeks. She thought about her old life, safe, invisible, carefully controlled. Thought about the woman she'd been before that wedding, before witnessing violence in a garden, before kissing a monster and discovering he was more human than she'd imagined. She didn't want to go back to being that woman. No, she said firmly. I'll meet your uncle. I'll be evaluated. And I'll decide for myself whether I want to be part of your world permanently. Victor stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. You understand what you're agreeing to. The life this means. I understand that I'd rather face it with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose danger over safety. Lena stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sure. I'm choosing you, Victor. All of you, the violence and the corruption and the impossible complications. Because underneath all of that, I see a man who's trying to be better than his circumstances allow. And I want to help him try. Victor pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and Lena felt him shaking slightly, whether from exhaustion or emotion she couldn't tell. You're going to regret this, he whispered. Probably, but I'd regret walking away more. They stood there in the morning sunlight, two people who shouldn't fit together but somehow did, while the guards tactfully looked elsewhere, and Mrs. Chen watched from the doorway with a knowing smile. The war was ending. But for Lena and Victor, something else was just beginning, something far more dangerous than any gang conflict could ever be. They were falling in love in a world that destroyed love as casually as it destroyed everything else beautiful and fragile, and neither of them seemed capable of stopping it. The meeting with Salvatore De Luca was scheduled for 8 that evening at the same private club where Lena had first witnessed the depth of corruption threading through the city's power structure. Victor spent the afternoon coaching her on what to expect, his tension palpable despite his attempts to appear calm. My uncle will test you, he said as they drove back into the city, the safe house disappearing in the rearview mirror. He'll ask questions designed to make you uncomfortable, to see if you break under pressure. He'll look for weaknesses he can exploit, inconsistencies in your story, any sign that you're not genuinely committed to this life. What happens if I fail his test? Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then he'll conclude you're a liability and suggest I end our association, permanently. The unspoken threat hung between them. Lena had seen enough of this world to know that ending an association with someone who knew too much didn't mean a polite goodbye and separate paths. It meant making certain that person could never talk. And if I pass? Then you become part of the family, protected, but also bound by the same rules and expectations that govern everyone else in our organization. You'll be expected to maintain silence about everything you see and hear, to support family interests even when they conflict with your own moral compass, to accept that your life is no longer entirely your own. Lena watched the city skyline grow closer through the windshield, those familiar towers now representing something different than they had a month ago. That sounds like a prison sentence. In some ways it is, but it also means you'll never be alone, never be unprotected, never have to face the world's dangers without the full weight of the De Luca family backing you. Victor glanced at her, his expression conflicted. I'm still not sure I should be letting you do this. You're not letting me do anything? I'm making my own choice. A choice I influenced by dragging you into my world in the first place. A choice I'm making with full knowledge of what it means, Lena corrected. Stop trying to take responsibility for my decisions, Victor. I'm not a child and I'm not a victim. I'm a woman who's choosing to stand beside you despite the cost. Something fierce and possessive flashed across Victor's face. Say that again. Which part? The part about standing beside me. Lena reached across the console and took his hand. I'm choosing to stand beside you, through whatever comes next, because you're worth fighting for even if you don't believe that yet. Victor pulled the car over suddenly, parking on a side street, and turned to face her fully. I'm not worth fighting for, Lena. I'm a criminal who's done terrible things in the name of business and family loyalty. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, perpetuated the same corrupt system I claim to hate. You deserve better than that. Maybe, but I don't want better. I want you. Lena cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I see all of you, Victor. The violence and the vulnerability, the monster and the man. And I'm choosing all of it because when I'm with you, I finally feel like I'm living instead of just existing. Victor kissed her then with desperate intensity, pulling her as close as the car's interior allowed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. If we do this, there's no going back, he whispered. Once my uncle accepts you into the family, leaving becomes almost impossible. You'll be bound to this life, to me, in ways that most marriages can't match. Then I guess we'd better make it count. Victor laughed, the sound raw and slightly broken. You're insane, probably, but so are you for caring about someone like me. Fair point. He kissed her again, softer this time, then pulled back and restarted the car. All right, let's go introduce you to my uncle. And Lena, whatever happens tonight, whatever he says or implies, remember that I'm on your side. They arrived at the club as twilight was settling over the city, the building's facade glowing with warm light that promised comfort and exclusivity. Victor guided Lena through the entrance with a hand on her lower back, and they were immediately escorted to the same private dining room where she'd first witnessed the corruption summit. Salvatore De Luca was already there, seated at the head of the table with a glass of wine and an expression of calculated interest. He looked older than Lena remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his presence still commanded the room with effortless authority. Victor and Miss Carter, please sit. Salvatore gestured to the chairs nearest him. I've been looking forward to this conversation. They sat, and a waiter appeared immediately with wine and appetizers that Lena couldn't imagine eating. Her stomach was twisted too tight with nerves to accommodate food. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. De Luca, Lena said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Salvatore, please, we're practically family already, given how much time you've been spending with my nephew. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Though, I confess, I'm curious about the nature of your relationship. Victor has never brought a woman to meet me before. You must be quite special. I'd like to think so, Lena replied carefully. Tell me, how did you two meet? I've heard several versions of the story, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. This was the test. Lena could feel Victor tense beside her, ready to intervene if she stumbled. But she'd prepared for this, had rehearsed the sanitized version of events that omitted the violence she'd witnessed while still explaining their public connection. We met at the Castellano wedding, she said. I was there as a guest of a friend, feeling somewhat out of place among all the society connections. Victor asked me to dance, and we discovered we had more in common than either of us expected. It grew from there. How romantic. And what exactly do you have in common with my nephew? You're an art gallery employee from Brooklyn. He's... Salvatore paused deliberately. A shipping logistics executive from a very old family with very particular traditions. On the surface, you seem quite mismatched. We share an appreciation for honesty, Lena said, meeting Salvatore's calculating gaze directly. Victor doesn't pretend to be something he's not. Neither do I. In a world full of performance and pretense, that's surprisingly rare. Salvatore's eyebrow rose fractionally. Honesty. An interesting quality to value in this particular family. I didn't say I valued dishonesty. I said I valued honesty. Victor has been very clear with me about who he is and what his life entails. I've chosen to accept that reality rather than demand he becomes someone different to accommodate my comfort. And what exactly has my nephew told you about who he is? The trap was obvious. If Lena admitted Victor had revealed the family's criminal enterprises, she'd be confirming she knew too much. If she claimed ignorance, she'd look naive or dishonest, neither of which would earn Salvatore's respect. He's told me that he comes from a family with complex business interests that operate in gray areas of the law, Lena said carefully. That loyalty and discretion are paramount, that the life he leads comes with dangers that most people never have to consider, and that once someone enters his world, leaving becomes difficult. And yet you're still here. I'm still here. Salvatore studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Victor. You've trained her well. She knows how to navigate difficult conversations without revealing too much or too little. I trained her to defend herself physically, Victor replied. The rest is all Lena. She's smarter than most people I work with and braver than she has any right to be. High praise from someone who rarely praises anyone. Salvatore took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving Lena's face. Tell me, Ms. Carter, what do you want from this relationship with my nephew? Money? Social status? Protection from some threat you haven't mentioned? I want him, Lena said simply. Not his money or his connections or even his protection, though I won't pretend those things aren't benefits. I want Victor, the man underneath all the armor and strategy, the one who's trying to find honor in a dishonorable world, the one who cares more than he wants to admit. For the first time, something shifted in Salvatore's expression, not warmth exactly, but something approaching approval. You're not what I expected. Most women who get involved with men in our organization are either looking for security or running from something. You don't seem to be either. I'm looking for a life that feels real instead of safe, Lena replied. I spent 28 years being careful, being invisible, making sure I never attracted the wrong kind of attention. And then I met Victor and realized that safety isn't the same as living. I'd rather have 1 year of dangerous reality than a lifetime of comfortable numbness. Salvatore laughed, the sound genuine and slightly surprised. Well, you've certainly made an impression. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze moving between Lena and Victor with calculation that was now edged with something that might have been satisfaction. Victor, you've chosen well, assuming Ms. Carter understands what she's agreeing to. I do, Lena said before Victor could respond. I understand that becoming part of this family means accepting certain obligations and maintaining certain silences. I understand that the world you operate in doesn't forgive mistakes or tolerate disloyalty. And I understand that once I commit to this, walking away won't be an option. And you're prepared to make that commitment? Tonight? Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, the final point of no return. If she said yes, she'd be binding herself to Victor's world in ways that would reshape her entire life. If she said no, she'd likely be signing her own death warrant for knowing too much while refusing to join the organization. But when she looked at Victor and saw the fear and hope warring in his dark eyes, the choice felt simple. Yes, I'm prepared. Salvatore nodded slowly, then raised his wine glass. Then welcome to the family, Lena Carter. May you survive it longer than most. The toast was ominous rather than celebratory, but Lena raised her own glass and drank anyway. The wine tasted like commitment and consequence in equal measure. The dinner that followed was surreal. Salvatore asked Lena about her work at the gallery, her family background, her education, all with the air of someone conducting a thorough vetting rather than making polite conversation. Victor remained tense beside her, his hand occasionally finding hers under the table in silent support. By the time dessert arrived, Lena felt like she'd been through an interrogation disguised as a meal. But she'd apparently passed whatever tests Salvatore had been administering because his demeanor had shifted from suspicious to merely watchful. One more thing, Salvatore said as the plates were being cleared. The Kim situation has been resolved. They've agreed to surrender their distribution territory in exchange for safe passage out of the tri-state area. The war is over. Relief flooded through Lena, though Victor's expression remained carefully neutral. What are the terms? He asked. Complete withdrawal within 30 days. We're absorbing their infrastructure and client base. It's a better outcome than I'd hoped for. We gained territory without the prolonged conflict that would have drawn federal attention. Salvatore's eyes glinted with satisfaction. Though I understand they made an attempt on you during the negotiations, I trust you handled it appropriately. They won't make that mistake again, Victor said flatly. Good. I'd hate to lose my best strategist to an ambush. Salvatore stood, signaling the end of the dinner. Victor, I need you in the office tomorrow morning. We have details to finalize. Ms. Carter, I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. It was a dismissal and a welcome in equal parts. Lena and Victor stood, exchanged polite farewells, and escaped into the night air with matching relief. Neither of them spoke until they were back in the car and several blocks away from the club. Then Victor pulled over again, this time in a parking lot overlooking the East River, and turned to face her. You did it, he said, and there was wonder in his voice. You actually impressed my uncle. I didn't think that was possible. I wasn't trying to impress him. I was trying to survive the conversation. Same thing, in his world. Victor pulled her close, kissing her with a desperate relief that suggested he'd been more worried about the outcome than he'd let on. You're part of the family now, officially protected, officially bound. There's no going back from this. I don't want to go back. Lena kissed him again, pouring everything she felt into the contact, relief and fear and fierce affection and the terrifying certainty that she'd just altered the entire trajectory of her life. I want to go forward. With you. Well, even knowing what that means? The compromises you'll have to make? The things you might have to ignore or participate in? Even knowing all of that. Lena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I'm not naive, Victor. I know this life will require me to bend my principles sometimes, but I'd rather bend them while standing beside someone I love than keep them pristine while living half a life alone. Victor went very still. What did you just say? Lena's breath caught as she realized what she'd admitted. I said I'd rather... The part about love. There was no point in taking it back now. The truth was already out, hanging between them in the darkness of the car. I love you. I probably have for weeks, but I was too scared to admit it because it made everything more complicated. But tonight, sitting across from your uncle and committing to this life, I realized that loving you is the only simple thing about any of this. Victor's expression went through a dozen emotions too quickly for Lena to track. Then he was kissing her again, harder this time, almost bruising in his intensity. When he finally pulled back, his voice was rough with emotion. I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to keep this professional and strategic and controlled. But somewhere between teaching you to break wrist holds and watching you stare down my uncle without flinching, I fell completely in love with you. And it terrifies me. Why? Because everyone I've ever loved in this life has ended up hurt or dead or corrupted beyond recognition. My father, my mother, friends who got too close to the violence. Victor's hands came up to frame her face, his touch achingly gentle despite the fear in his words. I don't want that for you. I don't want this world to break you the way it's broken everyone else. Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't, Lena said with more confidence than she felt. We'll protect each other. We'll hold on to the parts of ourselves that matter. We'll find ways to be decent people in an indecent world. That's not how it works, Lena. This life doesn't allow for... Then we'll change how it works. Lena's voice was fierce now, determined. You said yourself that you're your uncle's heir, that someday you'll run this organization. When that day comes, we'll reshape it. We'll find ways to maintain power and influence without the worst of the corruption. We'll choose which lines to hold and which compromises to make. It won't be perfect or pure, but it'll be better than what exists now. Victor stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. You want to reform organized crime from the inside. I want to make sure that when you take over from your uncle, you have someone beside you who remembers what honor looks like, who can help you navigate the difference between necessary evil and unnecessary cruelty. Lena took his hand, squeezing tight. I'm not saying we can make this world clean, but maybe we can make it less dirty. Maybe that's enough. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, real and warm and full of something that looked almost like hope. You're going to be trouble, he said. The best kind of trouble, but trouble nonetheless. I prefer to think of myself as a civilizing influence. That too. Victor kissed her again, soft and sweet this time. All right, let's try it. Let's see if we can build something better together. But Lana, it's going to be hard. Harder than anything you've ever done. And there will be moments when you hate me for dragging you into this. Probably. But there will also be moments when I'm grateful beyond words that you did. Lena settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. We'll figure it out together. That's what people who love each other do. They sat there in the darkness, holding each other while the city lights reflected off the river and the future stretched out before them. Uncertain and dangerous and full of possibilities, neither of them had dared imagine a month ago. The next year unfolded in ways both better and worse than Lena had anticipated. She kept her job at the gallery, though she reduced her hours to accommodate the increasing demands of her new role within the DeLuca family. Victor introduced her to the legitimate side of the family business, teaching her about shipping logistics and warehouse management and the 1,000 details that went into running a multi-million-dollar operation. But he also exposed her to the darker elements she'd have to navigate as his partner. She attended meetings where bribes were negotiated with the same casual efficiency as normal business contracts. She watched Victor make hard decisions about punishment and enforcement, maintaining the organization's power through controlled applications of violence that she still flinched from even as she understood the necessity. And slowly, carefully, they began implementing small changes. Victor started insisting on stricter rules about what business the family would engage in, drawing harder lines around trafficking and exploitation. He negotiated better terms for the legitimate employees who worked in DeLuca warehouses, improving safety standards and wages in ways that raised eyebrows among the other crime families, but also reduced the risk of disgruntled workers becoming informants. Some changes worked. Others backfired or proved impossible to implement given the realities of the world they operated in. But Victor kept trying, and Lena kept pushing him to be better than his circumstances demanded. And together they carved out a space that was neither fully legitimate nor completely corrupt. Salvatore watched their partnership with a mixture of approval and concern. "You're making him soft," he told Lena 6 months into her official association with the family. They were at another family dinner, this one celebrating the successful absorption of the Kim territory. "I'm making him strategic," Lena corrected. "An organization that treats its people well is more stable than one that rules through fear alone. Victor's learning to balance power with loyalty earned rather than extorted." "And you think that will work in our world?" "I think it's working already. Your employee turnover has dropped by 30% since Victor started implementing his new policies. Informant problems have decreased. The federal investigations that were gaining traction last year have stalled because you don't have disgruntled workers looking for revenge." Lena met Salvatore's calculating gaze steadily. Honor and profit aren't mutually exclusive. They just require more effort to maintain simultaneously. Salvatore studied her for a long moment, then laughed. "You really are going to be trouble. But Victor's right about you. You're smart enough to be valuable. Just make sure that cleverness doesn't convince you that you can change fundamental realities of this business." "I'm not trying to change fundamental realities. I'm trying to optimize within existing constraints." Spoken like someone who's been reading Victor's business school textbooks. But Salvatore's tone was approving rather than mocking. "Very well. Continue your optimization. But remember that at the end of the day, this organization exists to generate profit and maintain power. Don't let idealism interfere with those core objectives." It was as close to a blessing as Lena was likely to get from Salvatore DeLuca. She accepted it with a nod and returned to Victor's side, where he was deep in conversation with one of the family's shipping captains about new routes through the Panama Canal. Later that night, lying in bed in the apartment Victor had moved her into, a penthouse in Manhattan with security that would make a paranoid dictator jealous, Lena traced patterns on Victor's bare chest and contemplated how far she'd come. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Bringing me into your world?" Victor's hand stilled where it had been running through her hair. "Every day. And never." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." He tilted her chin up so he could see her face. "I regret that you had to lose your innocence about how power really works. I regret that you've seen violence and corruption and all the ugly realities that most people get to ignore. But I don't regret having you in my life. fighting to make me better than I would be alone. So it's both. Always both. Fair enough. Lena kissed him softly. For what it's worth, I don't regret it either. Even the hard parts. Even the moments when I hate what we have to do to survive in this world, because I'd rather navigate darkness with you than live in the light alone. You're going to make me believe in redemption if you keep talking like that. Good. Someone needs to. They fell asleep tangled together, and Lena dreamed of futures that seemed impossible. Victor running the organization with honor, the corruption gradually draining away, the two of them building something worthwhile from the ruins of what had come before. She knew it was probably fantasy, knew that real change in organizations like the DeLuca family came slowly, if at all, and that she and Victor would spend their lives making compromises that would haunt them. But she also knew that trying was better than accepting, that pushing for incremental improvement was better than resigned complicity. And some nights, that was enough. The proposal came on a cold evening in late November, exactly 1 year and 2 weeks after the wedding where everything had started. Victor took Lena back to the Castellano estate, now empty as the family traveled for the holidays, and led her through the gardens to the same clearing where she'd witnessed the assault that had changed her life. This is where it began, Victor said, his breath misting in the cold air. You saw something you shouldn't have, and I made a choice to protect you instead of silence you. That choice changed everything for both of us. Are you about to get philosophical on me? Lena teased, though her heart was already starting to race with anticipation of what might be coming. I'm about to get honest with you. Victor took both her hands, his grip warm despite the temperature. This year with you has been the hardest and the best year of my life. You've challenged me to be better than I thought I could be. You've stood beside me through violence and corruption and moral compromises that would have broken most people, and you've never asked me to be anything other than what I am. Victor, let me finish. He smiled, and there was so much love in his expression that Lena felt tears prick her eyes. I was born into a world that doesn't really believe in love, just in alliances and leverage and strategic partnerships. But you've taught me that love can exist even in the darkest places, that choosing each other deliberately and repeatedly is more powerful than any contract or arrangement. He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. I can't promise you a normal life, Victor continued, dropping to one knee in the dirt of the garden where their story had begun. I can't promise you safety or peace or freedom from the violence that's woven into my world, but I can promise that I will love you with everything I am, that I will protect you with everything I have, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to build something worthy of the faith you've placed in me. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was elegant and understated, a single diamond on a platinum band, beautiful without being ostentatious. Lena Carter, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in every sense of the word, in love and in life, and in the impossible task of making honor exist in a dishonorable world? Lena was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as she pulled Victor to his feet and kissed him fiercely. Yes, yes to all of it, to the love and the life and the impossible task, yes. Victor slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring a year's worth of restrained emotion into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing me, for staying when you should have run, for believing I could be more than what this world made me. Thank you for teaching me to be brave, Lena replied, for showing me that living fully means accepting risk, for loving me enough to let me see all of you, even the parts you're ashamed of. They stood there in the garden as darkness fell around them, two people who'd found each other through chance and violence and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The wedding took place 3 months later in a small ceremony that was half celebration and half strategic alliance. Salvatore walked Lena down the aisle, having announced to the other crime families that she was now fully part of the DeLuca organization and under his personal protection. Victor's associates filled the pews, creating an atmosphere that was equal parts romantic and menacing. But when Lena and Victor exchanged vows, promising to honor each other through darkness and light, to protect each other from threats both external and internal, to choose love even when fear would be easier, The moment felt genuinely sacred despite the corrupt world surrounding it. Marcus stood as Victor's best man, having become a friend to both of them over the months of training and shared meals. Sarah served as Lena's maid of honor, still somewhat bewildered by her friend's transformation, but supportive nonetheless. And when the officiant pronounced them married, when Victor kissed Lena with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man capable of ordering violence, the applause that followed was genuine rather than merely polite. The reception was held at the same club where Lena had first met Salvatore, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than sinister. Victor's associates toasted the couple's happiness. Members of allied families offered congratulations that were diplomatic rather than warm, and Salvatore gave a speech about family and loyalty that managed to be both touching and vaguely threatening. But the moment that mattered most came late in the evening, when Lena and Victor escaped to a private balcony overlooking the city lights. "We did it," Victor said, pulling her close against the cold. "We're actually married. Did you doubt we would be?" "I doubted I deserved to be. I still doubt it, honestly." Victor's arms tightened around her. "But I'm done questioning whether I deserve good things. I'm just going to try to be worthy of them instead." Lena turned in his embrace, taking his face in her hands. "You're already worthy. You always have been. You just needed someone to see it clearly enough to convince you. And you're that someone. I'm that someone." Lena kissed him softly. For better or worse, in sickness and health, through all the moral compromises and impossible choices that come with this life, I'm yours, and you're mine. That's not going to change. Even when it gets hard? Especially when it gets hard. Lena smiled, fierce and certain. "We're going to build something extraordinary together, Victor DeLuca. Not perfect, not pure, but better than what came before. That's our promise to each other, and to the world we're inheriting." "You make it sound almost possible." "It is possible. We're already proving it." She gestured back toward the reception, where Victor's reformed policies had created an organization that was fractionally less violent, marginally more honorable than it had been a year ago. "We're changing things one decision at a time, and when you take over from your uncle, we'll change them faster. And if we fail, if the corruption is too deep to reform, then we'll have failed while trying to make things better, which is more than most people in our position can say." Lena pulled him down for another kiss. "But we're not going to fail. Not together." They returned to the reception hand in hand, ready to face whatever their future held. The road ahead would be difficult, full of compromises and moral gray areas that would test them both. But they'd chosen each other with clear eyes and open hearts, and that choice would sustain them through the darkness. 3 years later, when Salvatore DeLuca died of a heart attack and Victor inherited control of the family organization, the transformation they'd been building toward accelerated. Victor restructured operations, cutting loose the most problematic elements while maintaining the profitable core. He negotiated new arrangements with law enforcement that reduced violence in exchange for selective cooperation on issues that didn't compromise the family's core interests. And Lena stood beside him through all of it, serving as his conscience and his strategist, the voice that reminded him what honor looked like when the pressure to abandon it grew too strong. Their life was never easy, never simple, never the fairy tale that romance novels promised, but it was real. It was chosen. It was earned through effort and compromise, and the deliberate decision to keep loving each other even when darkness pressed close on all sides. 5 years after that kiss in the garden that had started everything, Lena and Victor renewed their vows in a private ceremony attended only by the people who'd become their true family. Marcus and Angela from the training warehouse, Mrs. Chen, who'd cared for them both through the hardest times, Sarah, who'd watched her friend transform into someone stronger and stranger, but no less loved. "I never thought I'd be here," Lena said, as they danced alone under string lights in the garden of the safe house that had once been her prison and was now their retreat. Married to a crime lord, helping run an organization that exists in legal gray zones, making compromises I never imagined I'd accept. "Regrets?" Victor asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. "Not even one." Lena smiled up at him, this complicated man who'd taught her that monsters could choose to be human and that love could exist even in the darkest places. "I chose you, Victor. I keep choosing you, and I'll keep choosing you for the rest of our lives. however long or short they might be. Then I guess we'd better make them count. They danced under the stars while the future stretched out before them, uncertain and dangerous, and full of the complicated beauty that came from building something worthwhile in a world that tried to destroy everything good. Lena had walked into Victor's world through accident and fear, expecting to be destroyed by the darkness she'd witnessed. Instead, she'd learned to stand in that darkness without fear, to carry light into places where it seemed impossible, to love without illusion and fight for honor in a dishonorable world. She'd chosen the whole man, the violence and the vulnerability, the power and the pain, and in return, she'd become whole herself. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better than that. It was real. It was earned. It was theirs, and that was enough.